Figueres created Groundswell Initiative. And this is actually to bring the business and the non-party stakeholders to actually put a pressure. And guess what? This is actually the one that made the Paris working. That Paris can send a positive signal that we need to have 1.5 or 2 degree at that point of time, 2 degree, but no one is talking about 2 degree anymore. Now it's 1.5. So we can still do this now, especially with the urgency. So I'm so happy that we have a business and philanthropy forum established now. Continue voicing your voice through this kind of channel, through any arrangements that's happening that have access to the global decision making. And again, I'm not only talking about climate. If you are very involved in the SDG, then please use that platform also. I think the more voices that we make and send to the decision maker or the policy makers nationally or locally, it's better because the push has to come. We now have announcement after announcement about the loss and damage funding, right? That is because there's a lot of push from the community, particularly on the vulnerable community. And therefore, it's just a miracle decision that it's done in the beginning of the COP. And yesterday, I heard that it's already reached $700 million in the funding. Never happened before. So if we can work together and keep the pressure to the government, to the policymaker, and through different forums like what I mentioned before, then I'm optimistic that things and changes that we need is actually can happen.
Thank you. Felicitas, can I bring you in? It's always hard
Yes.
when you're on video.
No, that's totally fine. Thank you very much. Yes, 700 million have been pledged, but as far as I know, it takes about 100 million to move one small village. So 700 million is really just the start. And I think one of the issues we have is we need a power shift within philanthropy as well. We have a lot of philanthropy that is still structured in traditional ways because it is still set in the global north, where we don't have recipients as part of the decision making. We don't have grantees as representative on boards. So it's very difficult to build this human connection if you don't see the reality, if you don't bring the reality in the room. And so I think we also need to work on ourselves in the global north and question our own structures that are still very often stuck in the old ways. I think the second part that needs to happen is that we need to look at philanthropy in a different way. I mean, right now, only 2% of philanthropy goes into climate change, which is ridiculous. But we need to focus on the intersections of where climate intersects with the traditional ways of giving to health, to gender, to equity. But I think also philanthropy very often has been seen more as a band-aid, as charity. And I'm not talking about the bubble we all live in. I'm talking about the mainstream philanthropy that's out there. That's the bulk of the 600 billion that's given every year. So I think where philanthropy can really help is, as Leslie said, in the convening, but also in focusing attention on the role of finance, on the not delivered promises, on supporting movements that set the right kinds of incentive. That means that philanthropy has to be very close to the ground and very flexible and very nimble and very entrepreneurial. And I think that's something that we need to push as a sector as well, through collaboration between private and corporate philanthropy, through collaboration between philanthropy and the finance sector and impact investing, through better bridges between North and South, and through focusing on what are the most important levers, to speak more with one voice for new philanthropists coming in on where they can make the biggest difference, and really focus on the systems that Leslie talked about, which is why Lauda's work is so important for the sector.
Thank you very much, Felicitas. Neelam, to finish this reflection.
I have a lot to say. Yeah. So, I just think everyone said everything. I'll just try to knit it up, right? I started my journey in the private sector. I believe any rigor, anything that we do is because of that journey, right? But nothing is going to happen only with private sector money. I ran a for-profit business. I raised $10-20 million in impact investment. And finally, I had to go back and invest the last 6 years in my non-profit, right? I worked with the governments in the past. So blended finance, I think one of the biggest mindset shifts needs to happen around blended finance. So the world, I talk to philanthropists all the time. And to answer to Felicitas, if there's only 2% in climate action, you add SDG and you combine SDG and climate action, which it naturally is. It's 100%. So why these silos first and foremost? You do not need SDG and climate action silos. So I'll talk about that a little more. That is linked to proximal leadership and local leadership. You've all been talking about that, right? So I've learned all these terms at Catalyst 2030. We get funded by USAID in our work in India. 2% of their funding was going to local actors. Now it's 26%. But even then, a bulk of that is going through the people who've worked out of DC for years, now have set up branch offices in India. But this whole local leadership, proximal leadership, getting closer to the philanthropists, India is going to be the third largest economy in the world in the next 10 years. Your Responsible Leaders program, so critical for our high net worth individuals. So the top 10 people, they are now sort of trying to outpace each other. Our top 10 richest people on giving, they'll be the ideal givers because they're so close to the problem. But they need the global leadership to kind of get them into the act. We've got one woman, Rohini Nilakeni. She's amazing, but she's got the other 9 to kind of ramp up. I'll just share one example. I'm sorry if I talk a little long, but I'll share one example on the local leadership and the proximal leadership, showing the answers. So we've got this huge unicorn in India called Zero Da, made like he's a billionaire. He founded a $100 million climate fund for India. I met the CEO. I said, okay, he said, 18 months I've studied, what should I do for India? I said, more power to you. What have you discovered? And that's the entire premise. He whiteboarded. It's such an example of local leadership and proximal leadership emerging with this. I share that slide with everyone on the planet now. He said, first of all, if I have to spend $100 million in India, what will I measure? He said, I will measure reduction in carbon, reduction in emission, reduction in waste, and reduction in vulnerabilities. Then he went to the other side of the board and he said, what are the 7 indicators? Increase in income, increase in livelihood, increase in health, increase in equity, increase in localization. He had one thing linked directly to climate, increase in biodiversity. But all his 6 indicators were against reduction in vulnerabilities. And then I looked at that and I said, but when we work on reduction in vulnerabilities, we often go into communities with women. So the connection between gender and climate that he made was like amazing. But this is a guy with $100 million in his back pocket taking a decision locally after speaking to Indian think tanks, and he said, 70% of the action is the food, fashion, and lifestyle sector, construction, built environment. Our world's third largest polluter is cement, right? And he said, so anyway, I'm just saying, the guy funds us. He's from an organization called Rain Matter Foundation. Yeah, but we are building bamboo, for example. We're now doing a massive thing around scaling bamboo for India, for the global south. But that's going to help in construction industries, lifestyle is going to. but it's regenerative plantation, it's a carbon sink, it pulls carbon out of the atmosphere, right? But, so, just, I don't know if I managed to thread everything together, but financing for that, oh yes, I know what I had. Last 1 minute. So we've got a $15 million innovative finance instrument seeded by USAID to plant 3,000 acres of bamboo in one agroecological zone with smallholder women farmers. They will plant the bamboo. They will earn for the next 30 years. They will carbon sequester. They will do everything you said, right? They'll become rich. Now with that $15 million instrument seeded largely by philanthropy, we are moving to a $100 million instrument, right? And then with that, we are moving to government programs, easily $1 billion. But philanthropic catalytic capital is the key.
And if I may, and this is going to open to a reflection before, and I'm warning everyone in the audience, we are about to get to the point where I'm going to be asking you for your questions or reflections. And mindsets. So let's just come back to this question of people, because each of you have referred to people in different ways, and we are talking about institutional shifts, practice shifts, structural shifts, but underpinning that is our capacity to think differently and act differently. So the how question is not just a question of institutions, it's really ultimately a question of mindsets. If I think about my experience of working in this very integrated systemic way where you stop talking about climate and you start talking about the entire question of the human design for life, our resources, our well-being, one of the biggest immediate patterns of reaction I get is, okay, but that's a bit too big. Let's break it down into small parts and think about it as projects, because that's just too complex. We can't do that. And that pattern of continuing to projectize, to silo, to separate, to compartmentalize, that's a huge mindset shift. Where have you seen those kinds of shifts happen, where people are beginning to act and think in complex, integrated ways?
All right, great question. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we are humans that really are, well, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, it starts with us, our families, our communities. We are local beings. So I think where we have seen that shift is areas where we've actually rejected perhaps the way things are done and looked for new ways of doing things. And I'll give just a very quick example in the built environment, especially since Neela mentioned that. 40% of emissions, big issues. Buildings are big, you build it, it's there for 60 years. There's lots of stakeholders, but one of the stakeholders who's not at the table, community. And we are experimenting with different models of ownership where communities actually have a stake, community land trusts. And that's where they have a voice at the table, they have a stake, they become owners, and therefore they can influence what happens when you need to rapidly decarbonize and not leave anyone behind. That's kind of a bonkers idea, because when you think about building a building and the millions and millions that's needed, you don't really think about, let's do this in a way that actually sets up a trust that the community participates in. But that's being piloted across Europe, which is super exciting. And so I would actually urge, from a mindset shift, let's actually shift the business model and test new ways.
Which also means then going after our property models and get rid of freehold and go for fairhold. So big property shifts. Heber.
So I'll take also a specific example. When we started to respond an Impact Tech Accelerator, we wanted to support technology with sustainability in the core and make sustainability a currency and count and measurable. So if we take the example of impact investing or impact tech, the biggest shifts come when you make impact measurable, when you make our work as philanthropy measurable and accountable, when you can quantify. And I'll take here an example from engineering, because I was in medtech for many years, and when you deal with heart disease, it's all soft, it's all very difficult to measure. But the breakthroughs in the innovation in healthcare and medical technologies comes when you sit with the doctors and sometimes even the patient and try to quantify difficult to grasp things, difficult to measure things. And then you can say, I remember there were conversations where I would sit with a doctor and say, you know what, my simulation numbers show that this patient will do better. And he would tell me the patient died today. And I was like, okay, so let's go back to the loop. I know it's a hard example, but it's just the technical solution might not fit the practice. The on-the-ground feeling and the community's feeling might not fit what's being done in the lab. There are so many translational research, translational analysis, translation to happen between sectors. And we talked a lot about making the business case and making and looking into the different ways to make the finance work, financial model work, the corporate to invest, the private and philanthropy to work together. So there's a lot to be done by making things tangible and understand the languages of different players in the room now. Yeah.
Fanny, a last reflection on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck by, first of all women panel of CEOs. So you don't change the way things done if you don't change who is talking and who's listening. And the biggest change I see is when you engage communities, you get the innovation in practice, because that's the daily life. And so by asking the people who are actually experiencing the challenges, you get the best innovation. And for that to work, then you need this kind of decision-making process support, dialogue systems, etc., which all the foundations here and philanthropies are doing. The second, and this is, again, I'm sorry to bring this example of women, we are launching here tomorrow a report on nature finance written by women. We're all CEOs of important previously or currently organizations. So you have Naoko Ishii, who was leading the GEF, Mari Pangetsu, managing director at the World Bank, Vera Songwe was heading the ECA, Isabel, and myself. Different way of looking at nature finance, yeah, because it's a different group of people who are coming to the table to share their perspectives. So I think if you bring in excluded groups, and that includes in this big conference indigenous people, very happy to hear the outcome of engaging indigenous people with real money coming on the table. Youth in Africa make up 80% of the population. So in the next decade, if you are young, you will be African. That's the majority of the young people in the world. So what does that mean? Where are the young Africans in this conference? There are very few, even though Dubai is right next to Africa, very easy to get to. So I think we need to do more to engage youth and, of course, other excluded groups. I mentioned women already. Last point is where the money goes, because traditionally, finance is a bit lazy in saying, it takes me the same amount of time to give you $2 as to give you $2 billion, because you all the due diligence, etc. So how do we break that? And this is where we actually have been testing and learning through different ways to actually get the same level of scale. So we have a $2 billion reforestation and land restoration fund, but it's going to communities. It doesn't cost us any more to do it that way than, say, to give it to 5 corporations who then will generate the carbon. So I think it forces us, and maybe it's only possible because I come from a big family. I'm a daughter of a farmer, and so I know the risks of climate on farming, because it meant no shoes for a whole year if the crop is destroyed, because then the parents don't have the money to buy you shoes. So at 13 years old, you have to cut the shoes in the front so the feet can grow, because you can't afford to buy a bigger pair of shoes. So it's personal. Very personal. And by engaging people then who experience life that way, you are able to make change. Otherwise, we'll end up another maybe COP50, and we're still talking about it. So I'm very happy this time.
We're going to be
that, yeah, we may not be around.
We find the courage to not be here at COP50. Okay, let me turn to the audience. So, questions, thoughts. What would you love one of the people on this panel to speak to?
Thank you. So thank you very much. Wonderful panel. My question is about building trust, because we are talking about social infrastructure. We're talking about narratives and illusions we are creating, because all of this is social constructed, the economy, the finance, the investments. So, but if we want all this to happen, we need to build trust among different groups, global South, global North, and different ethnic groups, etc. So my question is, how we do that? How can we build trust?
And if I may just build on it, how does finance and wielders of financial resources do that?
Great question. I think I see Roberta here in the yes. Hi, Roberta. So I wanted to talk about something that we set up that's right now Global North, but maybe has the potential to go beyond, called the Table of Trust, because we find that amongst all of us as change makers in the impact space, we sometimes don't trust each other. We don't collaborate. Collaboration is not authentic. I mean, with us, of course, it will be. Speaking for myself. No, but I think that there is a problem that, okay, I know your question was geared more toward probably more on the community side and building trust, but I think we have to start with ourselves. So with Roberta, we set up this thing called the Table of Trust with Impact Europe, which is actually, it's really cool. It's like a Jeffersonian dinner where you have one question and one discussion, and you create bonds of everyone that comes around the table, and Kirsten has been part of that. So that's just, it's this mechanism. But I think if we don't take time to create these kind of thoughtful mechanisms and put time in it, it's not going to happen naturally. That's more the point.
Can I add to that? I think it's very difficult to trust leaders these days because we don't even understand what's the bigger vision and how to get there, or trusting how to get there. I think there's a lot of knowledge that's not being shared. The trust in science is becoming a critical point to succeed in this difficult time, and it's very difficult to trust if you don't have transparency over the process and the goal. And so I want to underline that we have also a responsibility as philanthropies to bring more clarity in the process, to make clear communications about what's possible and what's not going to be possible, and align on how to build this trust to society and to the people. Because if you're going to say, these are the goals for 2030, no 2035, no 2050, no, maybe you might lose your job tomorrow because we're going to do digitization is coming, and this is very irritating for someone who is in need to trust in your leadership. So knowledge and
consistency really matters. Felicitas, I'd love to know your perspective as you bring in those who wish to make a difference but don't know where to start. How do you build trust amongst new investors or newly interested investors?
By spending time together and focus on the real difficult questions in an environment that makes you understand that it's all about a common humanity, and it's all about either we all make it or we all fail. And we use nature. We use nature as a teacher to reconnect us to where we come from and where we know we find the solutions. And that makes us get out of our busy heads and into a situation where we just live together and explore together and build trust that way, because we're all trying to find new ways to rekindle that connection that we've lost. So I think trust gets built over time, and you need to find the right people to get out of our normal settings to reestablish new ways of talking without sometimes using words. And that's where nature can be a great tool.
Indeed, thank you. Riesta.
Just want to share from the perspective of negotiations, because building trust is something that's always challenging. But this is what's happening actually. You know, the illustration about the tip of iceberg. Listening, and taking time is for sure. But in the negotiation sense, and I think it's also applicable in other aspects of our work, is that understanding what's underneath the iceberg. So when you first know people, it's actually they just communicate their needs on the top of the service. But what's most important is actually understanding what's behind the needs and what's motivating the need. And I think if you understand that and show that to them, and I see that all the time in the negotiations, so we're no longer talking about the language, what is behind the language, and it's easier then to communicate.
That fundamental human question of what are you really actually attached to, the things that deeply drive that need. So let me close this session with a request to each of you. What is the one, let's call it the one thing, make it composite or make it singular, that you are reflecting upon in your own practice of building networks of action, of trust, of social infrastructure to drive and accelerate and build the conditions for transformation? What are you going to be really reflecting and working on as you think about the year to come? Neela, I'm going to start with you.
To us, I mean, to me, from the global south and from India, which is like one of the poorest countries in the world, actually, maximum number of people who live on less than $5 a day actually are in India. So we believe that communities, and that's what's driving me, frankly, that communities and women are going to be the most powerful mitigators of climate change on the planet. And that really drives me every day, because that energy that's coming from those communities, the women are like, yeah, we can do this. We'll plant the bamboo. We'll do all this. They're so enthusiastic. So I see so much hope, right? That all of us just get our act together, because down there, everyone's wanting to do the right thing. All your youth in Africa, so much energy. I was in Nairobi, seeing the youth, seeing the energy they have. We've just got to build the pathways for them, and we'll do 1.5 degrees, yeah, or whatever it's called. Thank you.
Thank you. Aliesta.
Yes, it is a bit paradox what I'm going to say, but I'm just going to quote the proverb from Africa, where if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go successfully, you go together. But the problem is that we don't have the time. So I actually leave it with this reflection.
For me, it's about being excited about thinking and new thinking the next solutions and ways to get there. It's like should be a creative, fun process of trying to solve the next challenges and see the opportunities. So to stay positive, use this energy of young leaders and cross-generational to sit on the table and be creative together to solve the next step. Everything is possible if we tackle it and have the intention to do it. So,
thank you. Fanny.
For me and for my team, it's how can we be brave enough to test new ways of doing things? How can we be humble enough to learn from what we fail to achieve? And how can we be patient enough to wait for the success and the impact? If we can maintain that bravery, humility, and patience, I think we will get there.
Thank you. Leslie.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago was Donut Day. You know that? Yeah, so this is Kate Rayworth's Donut Economics. And what keeps me going is the work that we're doing to rethink the economic system, which includes where leadership takes place. And the core of Donut Economics is distributed leadership. And to me, the core to getting us out of this mess is to enable and empower leaders at all levels to step up. So that's what gets me excited. And I'm trying to live that in my own foundation. We're considering even maybe throwing our strategy out the window and doing a more emergent strategy, because ultimately we should be guided by what bubbles up and support that bubbling. My head of strategy is going to kill me when she sees this, but I think we have to do that. And why do we have to do that as foundations? Because there's too much ego in this industry. So let's park our ego at the door, let's park our theories of change at the door, and let's really support, again, I'll probably get fired for saying this, but really support, you know, those in the field that are actually doing the work.
And to build on that, we talked about it because we're going into a more structured approach. So we'll have to talk. So we have this exchange, how to build on each other's experiences.
Geometric and loose.
Yes.
Indeed. Felicitas.
Yeah, two goals. Number one is to shift philanthropy to empower women and youth to build on the solutions that we have. And number two is to focus on those areas that are really creating a lot of damage, which is industrial decarbonization, where I think philanthropy is still remiss to act. So that's the two goals for 2024.
Which kind of come back to Leslie's question around how do you change the underlying system that produces the philanthropic gain, but is still actually powering up the economy. So thank you so very much. I think one of the things that I observe listening and with the privilege to be able to ask the questions is this extent of being able to rise above some of the too simplistic stories, division between global north and south, division between those with least and those with most, an ability to reconnect and to find how do positive dynamics of change unleash something that is magical, bigger than all of us, soft, strange, qualitative elements that somehow have the power to change the world. Thank you very much for your courage, for your efforts, and for the space to speak here today.
track we need to. This was the year of the global stock take, and the bottom line is a simple one, which is we need to be on a path to 1.5 degrees, and our current trajectory, depending on whether you go by what's been implemented or what's been committed, whether you're optimistic or pessimistic, puts us somewhere between, say, 2.1 and 3.2 degrees. Most reports I see would estimate we're probably on a 2.4 to 2.8 degree path. So we're not just a little off track from where we need to be, we're substantially off track. And what we need to do is to bring every lever we can to bear on how to do that, how to address that, and how to do it quickly. By the way, just to be clear what that actually means, if we're going to be on the track we need to be on, we should be reducing GHG emissions about 7% every year. And our current trajectory is that we're increasing 1.5%. So we're not just talking a small shift in trajectory, but we need a major one. And we all know how hard it is to deploy massive amounts of capital at scale. And I think one of the elements that led us to this report was the belief that AI was a lever to get more out of the assets and capabilities that we have today, not just depend on putting in the huge amount of assets that will ultimately need to be put in, but will allow us to make more progress faster, in addition to addressing all of the other challenges around adaptation, supporting research, and other things. So that's the starting point. So then we did a survey. BCG likes doing surveys, as you can imagine, and we asked people, like, what are the kind of ways you could see AI helping in climate? And first of all, the most important conclusion is the vast majority, 87%, see, then these are executives in decision-making roles. So it's not the general public, it's business leaders who can drive elements of what their businesses do. 87% believe that that AI can make a meaningful difference in climate. And then if you go a little bit deeper and say how, well, where they start is on reducing emissions, on measuring emissions. A huge issue right now, particularly when you get outside the four walls of a company, is being able to measure the emissions throughout its entire value chain, and on removing emissions. Because yes, job one is reduce as much as we possibly can, but we will not get to net zero unless there's not some element of removals as well. But what you also see, and that I found interesting, is that there's an opportunity around predicting hazards, about managing vulnerabilities, so that there are other elements that can make a meaningful difference for adaptation and resilience, and supporting countries and companies and communities that are wrestling with the changes of the climate that are already baked in. And that was a very important element of it. So then let me just give a quick sense of the framework that the report is built around, and that I think our conversation will be too. So the first opportunity is around changing the emissions trajectory through reduction and removal, and that there's really two separate components that we highlight. And one of the things that I love about the report is it's not about the theory of this. I mean, we can all postulate the theory. It's about real life examples. Google's been involved in a bunch, we've been involved in a number too, but we also bring in examples that neither of us were involved in that are just very meaningful to make a difference in the world. And we focus in two buckets. One is on measurement and monitoring. So how do we just even know what's out there? Because, as to use the old quote, you can't manage what you don't measure. And then second, where can you actually use it to reduce, to optimize grids, to support renewable agriculture efforts, to do other things that can really meaningfully shift the trajectory on emissions, often with assets that are in place today. And then second, to focus on adaptation and resilience. It's a desperate need in a warming planet, particularly with so many parts of the world that don't have the resources to really invest in everything. No one can invest in everything to build adaptation, so to address adaptation. So where can you focus resources in the best ways? And there we focus in two critical elements. How do we predict hazards with greater reliability so that we can see what are the biggest dangers coming? And then how do we manage the vulnerabilities? What are the vulnerabilities that we want to tackle? And then finally, I do want to highlight that you can think about AI in many other ways as well, a number of which have relevance for climate, whether it's climate modeling to predict drought or wildfire spread, whether it's climate economics. I think one of the things that frustrates me the most right now is you read report after report about how much it will cost to address climate, you see very inadequate studies of the cost of inaction. And one of the roles that, and the inaction in many cases swamps the cost that we're talking about to act. But if you don't know what those costs of inaction are, you can't get the public or government officials or company leaders often to make the investments. And so using AI to help understand what are the costs of inaction can make a difference. We can use it for things like education and behavior change with the general public, whether it's helping people know what actions to take on a daily basis, or whether it's just educating people more generally. And finally, of course, and we read about this, AI is going to be critical to fundamental research and breakthroughs. Fusion energy may be the most exciting, but the most far out, but you can find so many examples of climate technology or other opportunities to make a difference where AI can play a central role. So the report goes through all three of those buckets and provides examples on each of them. And then before I turn it over to Kate, the final thing I want to highlight is we're not talking about small numbers here. What we're talking about, our best estimate, using real-life examples. So this isn't the theory of what AI might be able to do someday. If we just think about scaling the examples that are already in the world today, we think it has the potential to contribute meaningfully to 5 to 10% greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So if you think about what we need to do over the next decade, which is take out half, give or take, of the emissions, we're talking about AI can contribute 10 to 20% of that journey. But the thing to remember is AI is a low capital investment technology. So yes, we'll need to do many other things as well. But this is like if you were ranking the kinds of investments you would make first, always you go after the places where you get the lowest investments with the biggest bang for the buck. And AI has enormous potential to be a part of that journey. So that's what I wanted to get us started. I think, Kate, now you're going to dig in a bit more on the policies and some of the things that we can do.
Great. Can you all hear me? Yep. Okay, great. And Rich, I'll grab the clicker from you.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Well, thank you so much, Rich. And it has been truly such an honor and a pleasure partnering with you and your team on this report. And thank you all so much for being here to have this conversation with us. And I really wanted to underscore the point you were just making. You know, what we keep talking about at this COP is we have the technology, we have the solutions, we just need to accelerate our progress to get to that 43% reduction we need to see by 2030. And so that's why I think this finding is really exciting. It's all about how can AI be a companion to existing technologies and solutions to drive progress more quickly. And when we get into the panel conversation, we'll give you some really real world examples about where that's happening today. And I think that's also the other really exciting part of this is not theoretical. And so as Rich said, I really encourage you to read the report because it is exciting to see how much is already happening. You know, we've said at Google, we've been an AI first company for 7 years. So although we've only more recently started hearing a lot more in public discourse about AI through generative AI, we've been at some of these solutions for quite some time, and now they're really beginning to bear some fruit. So a couple of the other insights that we shared in the report are there's 3 really key areas that we're seeing big opportunities. And again, this is based on our lived experience at Google of the kinds of solutions that are working that we've been building over the last many years. So of course, information. You know, we've been talking a lot this week. I'm sure you've been in conversations about the data. We have so much information, but how do we organize that information and make it universally accessible and useful? That might sound familiar. That's actually the mission of Google. AI can supercharge that in really powerful ways. Around prediction, you know, Rich, you were mentioning, of course, we're also dealing with extreme weather events today. This is not over the horizon anymore. And so we're seeing really powerful opportunities to better understand weather patterns, to better understand how wildfires spread, to better understand global hydrologic models. So again, really powerful opportunities to deal with the impacts we're seeing today, to prepare and become more resilient for the future. And then the last area is around optimization. This is, of course, the superpower of machine learning. such a tremendous opportunity to reduce energy use, to reduce the need for materials, to do things in a more efficient way, whether that's routing, shipping, how we fly in the sky, how we produce materials. So again, we'll get into some concrete examples, but this is the big opportunity. And of course, this is a big double bottom line opportunity, not only to get more value out of our environmental resources, but also to save money. And the second part of the report really touches upon the environmental footprint of AI. You know, at Google, the way that we talk about our strategy is that we need to be bold and responsible. And so I think it's really important that we're very upfront about what do we know about the environmental footprint of AI, and also what are some unanswered questions that we really need to do more work around. So what you're seeing up here are two of the key stats. This is strong, third-party verified research that's been published in journals. The first is around the greenhouse gas emissions of global data centers. So in 2022, global data centers represented about 0.1 to 0.2% of emissions. So that's still a relatively small number. And in that, we estimate that roughly 25% of that was going towards machine learning. Then on water use, this is another key area to take a look at because many data centers globally use water for cooling because it's actually more energy efficient. The Department of Energy has a study that shows that in the US, data centers used about 0.2% of water. So again, I think it's important to level set on what is the science that we have today, what do we understand about the footprint today, but also that we know that we're at an inflection point in AI and that actually there isn't good data that predicts what is that curve going to look like, what is the energy consumption, water consumption going to look like in the future. So we identify that as a key area for more research, and that's certainly something we're going to be doing more work on in the coming years. And then the last thing I wanted to hit on is policy recommendations. That's the third part of this report. As a former policymaker myself, and we're going to be joined by Rick Duke in just a moment, who's a wonderful former colleague. It's so critical that not only do we have technology companies in the private sector coming to the table, but also we need policymakers. And so we talk about these three key areas where policymakers can really make a difference. First is around enablement, creating the enabling conditions for us to get maximal benefit, to get to that 5 to 10% potential for emissions reductions. So that's everything from having in place positive data sharing policies, doing job skilling. This is a really critical topic to make sure that people can utilize AI in their everyday lives alongside the work that they're doing. The second area we identify is around deployment. How do we put in place the policy conditions to enable deployment in a responsible way? And then the third area is, again, what we were talking about just a moment ago with the environmental footprint. How can policymakers put in place the right incentives, the right guardrails around the environmental footprint of AI? So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to turn it back to Rich to introduce our next speaker.
We'll hold that because I've got this. Okay, so we're going to do two things now. We are going to hear from one of our speakers, and then we're going to do our panel. It's my great pleasure to welcome Damilola Ogunbiyi. Again, I think I'm getting closer now. The CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. She's the CEO and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainability for All and co-chair of UN Energy. She focuses on closing energy access gaps, showcasing that a clean energy transition is possible, and working to provide the opportunity of a prosperous, dignified, and healthy life for all. And she leads SC for All's work to bring clarity and focus on a critical path towards SDG 7 implementation in the context of the Paris Agreement on climate change, and works with private and public sectors to catalyze country-level actions and support cross-cutting high-impact opportunities. So welcome, and we're so looking forward to hearing from you. That's perfectly fine. Is that mic on over there? Or you could just stand here, whichever you prefer.
Hi, Sorry, I thought I would be at a podium. Hello, thank you everybody for having me. Thank you, Google. Google have been our real great partners to the UN system and UN Energy. For all of you that don't know, we have an energy compact process called 24 Free Carbon, which is institutions like Google have signed up to. Why this is relevant is because how AI is powered is just as important as the AI system itself. I work on making sure no one is left behind and alleviating people out of energy poverty. So it's the less sexy side of climate. And why that is important is because you cannot live a dignified life without a basic minimum amount of energy. And while tools like this and what Google has created are so vital, is it allows us to predict how much energy people are going to need, where they're going to need it, the types of energy, the affordability level, and the willingness to pay. And they're two different things, what you can afford and what you're willing to pay. So all these indices allow us to say, where are the most vulnerable people? How do we build the health systems around them, the education system around them? But energy really is the basis for a lot of these things. So as we sit here today and we talk about transitions, it's also important for us to think about people who have nothing, people who unfortunately won't be able to view us here today through an internet because they don't have any electricity or energy access at all. And it will be also important to think that this problem is not just a climate issue, it is actually a development issue. And in the most vulnerable countries, climate is development and development is climate. And I'm really, really proud to see how many governments from the global south are actually leading charge in climate ambition. And unfortunately, governments from the developing world are not recognizing that they have to use less for other people to have anything at all. So having said that, we think AI is really, really a game changer as it deals with energy poverty. And again, no more doom and gloom, but I just want to bring one statistic to you that 2.3 billion people in this world do not have access to clean cooking. It is the 5th largest cause of death for an African woman today. So anything that we can do to support this cause is not just about nice presentations or reports, which are really important, but as the host said, implementing this is actually saving lives. So thank you so much for having me. Sorry I have to run, and great work to Google and their partners for bringing this to the forefront. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. So we're now going to begin our panel, and I want to welcome to the stage, well, Kate, of course. In addition to her role now as Chief Sustainability Officer at Google, she was previously the United States' first federal Chief Sustainability Officer, where I love this stat, she was responsible for promoting sustainability across the U.S. government, which is 360,000 buildings, 650,000 vehicles, and almost half a trillion dollars annually in purchased goods and services. So that's certainly a big portfolio. So you've lived it on the government side, and now, of course, you're helping to drive it for the world in your role at Google. I want to welcome Rick Duke also to join us. He's, as I said, Deputy Special Envoy for Climate for the U.S. He focuses on encouraging major economies to develop and implement ambitious emissions reduction targets under the Paris Agreement. He also works to accelerate progress towards clean energy and to advance fast cooling strategies. We will most certainly need fast cooling strategies in the decades ahead. Right now, I guess it's slower warming strategies, and then we need, so we'll talk about that. And finally, he served as Special Assistant to President Obama, helping to craft and implement Climate Action Plan, including defining the 2025 emissions reduction target from the Paris Agreement. And finally, I really welcome Johan Rockström, the director for the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. He's, I think, known to all of us, an unbelievably well-known scientist for his work on climate sustainability issues, and specifically the planetary boundaries framework, which I think has become so embedded in our understanding of what we need to do, that he first published in 2009 and then updated in 2015. Those 9 planetary boundaries are argued to be fundamental in representing a safe operating space for humanity as they lay out environmental guidelines and the limits that we all need to operate within. He also, just this year, led the study by the Earth Commission on the 8 safe and just Earth system boundaries, so that we can have everything in what we do, make it possible for everything to thrive. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to get us going. So, you know, we know AI has the potential to help mitigate, and the estimates from our work together was 5 to 10%, so a very meaningful number, which is actually the total emissions of the EU is at the higher end of that range. Johan, what role do you think AI can play in terms of climate science acceleration?
Yeah, thanks, Rick, and great to be here at this very important topic and actually disruptive topic, because we see when we assess the landscape that this is really a starting point of nothing less than one part of a fourth industrial revolution. I will leave aside for the moment the mitigation assessments, because what we are focusing all our efforts on today in science is really on your climate fundamentals part and the whole topic on predicting hazards. We're increasingly using machine learning, big data, and AI methods to improve the prediction of extreme events. We're actually able today to get a handle of the Indian monsoon through AI applications, improving our prediction with 2 weeks before any weather system is able to do the same. This is an enormous help for small-scale farmers and their decisions of how to buy seed and fertilizers and when to kick off their rainy seasons. But we're right as we speak now working increasingly on looking at detection of tipping points. This is, I would argue, one of the big holy grails to be able to really guide our journey into the overshoot period that we're very likely entering. So all science shows, the IPCC supports it, that we unfortunately will very unlikely have a journey directly to 1.5 from our current 1.2, but we'll have to unfortunately cope with 30, 40 years of overshoot. Now, crashing through 1.5 somewhere 2030, 2035, 30, 40 years of overshoot at best, and then land back at 1.5 by the end of the century. By the way, that's another topic, but the only reason why we land back is if we come back within planetary boundaries. Other topic. The big AI question is what happens during the overshoot? Can the Earth system cope with 0.2, 0.3 degrees Celsius of overshoot beyond 1.5 when the science now shows that go past 1.5 and we likely trigger multiple tipping points? We simply do not know. AI can help us. This is an area where satellite remote sensing data, what Google Earth Engine represents, together with neural networks and machine learning, can help us in getting better precision on the likelihood of crossing tipping points during different periods of stress caused by our climate change. So I think this is, you know, it's really urgent to get this science in place. So it is both about predicting extreme events happening, you know, droughts, floods, monsoons, but also the longer-term challenges of tipping point detection.
Yes, I think that is probably, because you said 0.2 to 0.3 degrees C, but the trajectory on could be even more than that. And,
oh, yes,
and I think that the understanding the tipping point issue is going to be a massive one to try to get people to step up in the level of action and engagement. That's a very interesting.
No, of course, don't get me wrong here. I mean, we're following a pathway that takes us to 2.93 degrees Celsius that we're following today. That is a path to disaster. To be honest, we may not even need AI to assess the outcomes of that future. But if we deliver as we are trying to set out to do, and that we have a chance of coming back after a period of overshoot, that's also when we need to understand what are the likelihoods of being able to be successful.
So you're saying even in the optimistic case, we need AI, or
absolutely.
It can be a tool to help understand what the impacts could be, let alone in the more challenged cases.
Correct.
Great. Rick, love to hear from you about how you see AI as a potential accelerant in taking on climate action and where you see the biggest opportunities in that. And actually, do you have particular sectors or parts of the global economy where you think it could be particularly relevant?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to build on some of the discussion so far. You could take this in a lot of different directions. I think we will take AI for climate in many different directions. And I'll start by noting that we are, as U.S. government, seeking to put AI for climate literally into the text of the outcomes here at this COP, including potentially through the global stocktake, because we do think it has such comprehensive implications for climate action and tremendous opportunities if we manage it right and if we invest together to tackle the kinds of things that Johan was referencing and the mitigation potential that it can bring, as the report has indicated from BCG. But let me just give a specific example. You noted fast cooling, you could call it fast mitigation, if you will. And I think it builds on some of the points that Dr. Rockstrom was just making, and also news from just yesterday here at COP. We were privileged to be co-hosting, as U.S. government, a summit on non-CO2 greenhouse gases, methane and non-CO2 greenhouse gases with China just yesterday, where there was, perhaps most importantly, for the first time, China stepped up and said it would address non-CO2 greenhouse gases, including methane, in its next Paris Agreement target. I mention that because those non-CO2 greenhouse gases would be the third largest source of emissions in the world if they were a country. And now they're going to be in the Paris Agreement architecture. And the US and China with UAE called on countries around the world to join in a fast mitigation effort on methane and non-CO2. Also $1 billion in new grant money put forward and a set of regulatory steps by governments. So I want to mention that in part because it can feel very overwhelming that we're still headed towards, call it 2.5 to 3 degree range. Reference case today, you can debate the numbers. But at least we're not headed towards 3.5 to 4, which is where we arguably were headed before the Paris Agreement was put in place. And I say that to note that through the Kigali Amendment on HFCs, which eliminates up to 0.5 degree of centigrade, through the work of the Paris Agreement itself with the NDCs, now more comprehensive in China, including fast mitigation through addressing methane, the world is incrementally improving the picture, and we just need to pick up the pace. AI is something that in many ways can help us to better understand the risks from failure to do that, but also set us up for success in actually mitigating at the pace and scale and comprehensiveness that's required. I will just note that in the question of methane very specifically, and for that matter, things like tropospheric ozone, which accounts for 0.25 C of today's warming effect, but very few people think about as a climate forcer. There's massive opportunity for AI to help governments to understand what's happening in the atmosphere, what is driving ground level ozone formation in their economy right now, in a way that then they can act on with precision and speed in order to mitigate things like VOC emissions that would cut not just that public health pollutant of ground level ozone, but also deal with that 0.25 C of today's climate change that it is causing. So that's an example of a very technical area where better computing power, better machine learning, and AI specifically could be very useful in giving governments like China the opportunity to act on a key climate prize that's also going to improve public health, and by the way, reduce the 6% global crop losses that ground level ozone is currently causing. So win-win-win, and you can say the same thing about measuring methane with more precision so that we can mitigate methane more effectively. So it's a fast cooling or fast mitigation opportunity, but just one of many sweeping opportunities that advanced computing and AI specifically can help us with.
So, Kate, just before I come to you, because we're on methane, I happen to be with an energy CEO from a particular country where methane is actually a real challenge for them right now. When we were talking about what they could do in the short term, AI and methane was like the top of the list for them to get fast on it. I mean, there'll be obviously a lot of capital investment to deal with it in the longer term, but how you build methane AI tools in this for something that over 25 years is 80 times worse than carbon dioxide, even though it's measured at 28 over 100 years, it's incredibly important. Also for your planetary overshoot, I think it's a perfect example of where it can make a difference. Kate, you talked about, when you were presenting the slides a couple minutes ago, opportunities in information, optimization, and prediction. And you guys have been living it in practice in many examples, and I thought maybe you could bring that to life a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, we're also very bullish on the opportunity for AI to do better methane detection. So that's something that we're actively working on with partners partners. And so we're very much looking forward to continuing that conversation with you, Rick. Yes, so I would love to share some examples because as I said, I think what's really useful about this report is it's showing us what's already working today and insights in what we need to be doing more of. So information, here we know that we can put more helpful information in the hands of businesses, of policymakers, and individuals when they're making key decisions, and that AI is a very powerful tool for doing that. So one really nice example of that from our work at Google is something called fuel-efficient routing. So you may have noticed if you use Google Maps, maybe you even used it today, there's a little green leaf that shows up in your navigation now. That's showing you the most fuel-efficient route if it doesn't already have the same ETA. And what we're doing in the background is using AI to optimize across a bunch of different variables, the gradient of roads, what's traffic like today, and several others, and then providing a very simple decision-making moment for the driver or the user of, would you like to take the most fuel-efficient route? And this is working. This is having very real-world impact. So we brought this tool into Maps in October of 2021. And since then, we've seen 2.4 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions avoided through people using eco-friendly routing. That's like taking about 500,000 fuel-based cars off the road. So we're seeing really real-world impact by putting helpful information in people's hands at that moment of decision. Then when we talk about optimization, I mentioned this is the superpower of machine learning. There's a lot of really great examples of optimization, but I think my favorite one right now is related to aviation. So we talk a lot at COPs about hard to abate sectors. We know global aviation is roughly 2% of global emissions, and that a lot of the technology solutions that we're seeing, aviation biofuels, alternative forms of engines, batteries, these are going to take a long time to deploy. They're probably not going to get fully deployed by 2030. But there's a really exciting new opportunity that we've found, which is that the IPCC tells us that a third of the global warming impact of aviation is actually coming from contrails, those white plumes that you see sometimes, and that's really important. They're only formed sometimes behind jets. Well, what we were able to do in a partnership with Breakthrough Energy and American Airlines was first to use AI to analyze satellite imagery of contrails to better understand the conditions under which contrails are forming, because we actually didn't have great insights into that. And then to use that to provide really easy and implementable insights to pilots about how to change their elevation when they're flying to avoid the formation of a contrail. And we had a very exciting outcome in our first pilots with American, which is that they were able to reduce contrails by more than half, by 54%. So suddenly we're seeing a hard to abate sector with solutions that are going to take a long time, and then we could perhaps get rid of a whole third of those impacts through the power of AI. And now we're expanding that work in partnership with Eurocontrol, who manages the busiest European airspace, and we're looking forward to bringing more partners in on this as well. And then the third area I'll just touch upon is prediction. Of course, Johan, you were talking about all the really powerful ways you're looking at longer-term prediction. We're also seeing really important use cases for dealing with the extreme weather that people are experiencing today. As you probably know, the Secretary General has placed a really large emphasis on early warnings for all. And so we've built a partnership with the WMO, particularly around flooding. And so what we're bringing to that partnership is a tool that my wonderful colleague, Dr. Yossi Matias, who's here with us at COP, he and his team started building this tool in 2018. And what they did is they used AI to build a world-class global hydrologic model that enables us to predict riverine flooding now 7 days in advance. That's something that was never possible before. And so now through this platform called Flood Hub, we are able to provide these 7-day in advance early warnings to communities. And we're doing this for over 80 countries around the world on every continent, reaching populations of up to 470 million people. So this has the potential to save lives. And we saw this just a couple of months ago in August in Chile. There was terrible flooding, and Flood Hub was delivering actionable warnings to that community to get out of harm's way. So those are just a few of the examples which I would point to that we're really excited about.
I loved all of them. I just have to say, as someone who flies a lot, it was shocking to me when I realized like 3 or 4 years ago how much contrail contrails. I just always thought it was the carbon dioxide out the back of the plane. And I get why that's hard, and hydrogen in planes is many decades away in these solutions, but solving contrails feels very solvable. So bringing AI to it, it doesn't solve the whole problem, but if you can take a meaningful chunk, that one is, it's personally because it's one of my biggest contributions to global warming. So I love that. So, okay, you can't talk about AI without talking about opportunities, which we've been discussing, but also risks. Some of those risks are just in the energy consumption, the water usage of AI data centers themselves. And I think it's really important we take a couple minutes. Johan, I wanted to start with you just to get your sense of how do you think about the risks of AI as you think about environmental impacts, planetary boundaries, the kinds of topics that you look at. And then Kate, you guys are living it on the ground, so I wanted to get your perspective on it too.
Yeah, thanks. So just before coming to risks, I just want to close kind of this first segment by also saying that one of the big steps we're taking now, you introduced me by reminding that the first planetary boundary science paper was published in 2009, the second one in 2015. We actually did a third update in 2023. Following roughly an IPCC pace, 6-7 years between each assessment of the state of the planet, which of course is unacceptable in a situation where we need to exponentially start transforming ourselves back into a safe space. In the New York Climate Week and following up here at COP28, we're now stepping up the game and going to every year produce what we call a planetary boundary health check. So basically measuring the planet is a necessity today. All the biophysical processes that regulates the livability on Earth. And we cannot do that without big data, AI, to be able to get the frequency and the resolution required for that measurement. So, you know, on all accounts, I mean, from the mitigation opportunity all the way to actually monitoring the planet, I would argue that we cannot do it without putting all the technologies we have now to work. Then when it comes to risk, of course, this is a discussion very, very broad in society today of the risks of AI moving out of control in terms of self-reinforced intelligence. I mean, that is one part of this, but from a climate science perspective, I must say that we see more opportunities than risks in our assessment area, but also in the solution space, and are therefore not so nervous about the risk of having general intelligence suddenly taking over the trajectories of human development. So I would rather kind of hold it there and say that climate science now shows that we need to really mobilize big data and AI technologies for the good and really emphasize that investment.
And Kate, you had talked about energy and water impacts and trying to manage those. I know that's something you guys have thought a whole lot about, and maybe you could just share, like, how are you actually trying to make sure that we are addressing those issues even while we use AI for all the positive benefits that Johan was just describing?
Yes, absolutely. And so I think we of course are very bullish on the opportunity space for AI, but as I said at the outset, we also have to be extremely responsible and thoughtful about the environmental footprint of AI models, of operating the data centers that enable those models. So I'll share a little bit about our experience from Google and what we see that's working, and again, where we think there's more work to be done. So, you know, AI is at an inflection point today, and so it is hard to predict what the energy consumption will look like on a 2030 time horizon. But what we do have to look at is a long history. You know, Google built its first data center in 2007. We've now had hyperscale data centers for quite some time. And these hyperscale data centers are highly optimized. They're built for efficiency. So for instance, at Google, what we found is our data centers today are 1.5 times more efficient than an average data center, and compared to 5 years ago, we can get 3 times more compute for the same amount of electricity. So there's a long track record of optimizing the overhead systems in data centers. We need to keep doing more of that. Then there's also actually how we train the models themselves. We also have to do that in a highly efficient way. So last year, my colleague Dave Patterson and several other colleagues from Google published a paper that pointed to best practices for how you can train models in a much more efficient way. And what that pointed to is that you can reduce energy consumption by 100x, emissions by 1000x by doing some pretty basic things in how you train your models. So we need to keep doing more of that. We need to keep sharing those best practices and adopting them across the industry. Then there's also the hardware itself. There's some very specialized hardware that's being built to run AI models, and at Google we have TPUs, tensor processing units. And one of our most recent versions of that, TPU v4, is one of the most efficient processing units that is out there today, so we need to keep pushing on the efficiency there as well. And then the final area, which Damilola touched upon in her opening remarks, is 24/7 carbon-free energy. We also absolutely need to ensure that we're able to power global data centers on carbon-free energy every hour of every day, wherever they're operating. So that's the goal that we've set for ourselves at Google by 2030. We're about 64% of the way there today, and we need to keep driving towards that goal. So that's how we're thinking about it on the energy and emission side. And then also to touch upon water, because as I mentioned at the outset, a lot of data centers use water for cooling, and the way that we've come to think about this is climate conscious cooling, that we need to look at this energy water nexus, that water can be much more energy efficient, but it's not always the right answer to use water. And as we all know, water is highly contextual. Where a watershed is healthy, there can be responsible use of water. Where it's not, we need to think about solutions. So that's something we're very passionate about at Google. We have a goal to replenish 120% of the water we use globally on an average basis by 2030. And so that's through partnering with communities, through working to make sure watersheds are healthy around the world, and then also looking at alternative solutions to water-based cooling where we need to. So I do really think, Rich, just to wrap up on this point, that we need to keep paying attention to this. I think we all believe that the opportunity of AI will far outweigh these risks, but it doesn't mean that they aren't really important. We need to stay on top of them.
Very helpful. And so I want to take advantage, we don't have so much time left, but I really want to make sure we get to policy, because we have the privilege, Rick, of having you here, but also Kate with your experience. And just so where do you see from a policy point of view what we can do, what we should be doing to enable AI? Because the potential that we shared at the beginning, that 5 to 10% is enormous. But we have to, it's one thing to say it's the potential, it's another thing to make it real, at scale, all around the world. And we're finding in so many fronts this collaboration between business and government to get to effective policy is essential to go faster on things. And I just wondered, Rick, you're living this day and night. I mean, going faster on climate is like what you're living and breathing, and where you see policy as an unlock to go faster as it relates to AI-related opportunities.
Yeah, thank you. And first, let me just say, as a consumer of the eco option on the Google Maps, I love it because often it gives you kind of a different route that's more interesting, a little slower pace, and also nice to put a little less wear and tear in the car. It's great, and it's cool to hear about the contrails, about that. A lot of fun things happening, as well as the big picture things that this can make possible. On policy questions, I'm not going to comment on the sweeping questions around AI. I'm not in a position to do that. It's not my portfolio. What I can say is that when it comes to the work that our office does under Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, who leads our international climate work, and I serve as one of his deputies, we are most focused on what's the potential for this technology to help with our agenda of keeping a safer 1.5 degree centigrade future within reach and helping the world in terms of preparedness and adaptation to climate impacts. And on that front, we see major opportunities, and we've been gearing up accordingly. So, for example, our Agency for International Development in early 2022, which in terms of the public and government awakening to the reality of AI. It feels like a while ago. Agency for International Development for the United States was on the case with an AI strategy, and they are working with AI in crucial development priority areas that intersect with climate, such as how to better predict and thereby respond to the risk of famines and food shortages. There's a tremendous partnership between AID and NASA to do the whole gamut of remote sensing toolkit in order to help with the development agenda with early warning systems and with adaptation goals, with agricultural productivity, including through basically versions of precision agriculture with better integration of predictions around the weather and rainfall and so on and so forth. So all that is moving, and I think it is, that's just one agency in the vastness that is the US government, but it is, I think, important that governments everywhere with the capacity for this kind of work really proactively engage stakeholders, other agencies, and try to identify and chase these opportunities, because they don't just happen without convening and catalyzing within government, outside of government, and so I'm really pleased that we are seeing that happen in key agencies that we work with out of the Special Envoy's Office on climate. In addition, President Biden has, in October of this year, put forward an executive order that seeks to manage AI more broadly, and that includes a very specific call for the Department of Energy to take a hard look at what can be done on use of AI in speeding deployment of clean energy solutions and related challenges around the grid and so on and so forth. So that work is underway, and it's underway because President Biden and White House leadership are eager to see that we really use the full toolkit that we have from the climate science challenges that are so essential to really move faster to address, to mitigation, and then of course to helping the world managing through the ever more serious climate impacts that we're suffering. And so hopefully as an element of that, we can see more and more work on this fast mitigation complement to the energy transition through tackling non-CO2 emissions that are short-lived but potent greenhouse gases, and so we can get a tremendous bang for our buck if we can have better data on things like methane and tropospheric ozone and so on and so forth, so that we can get at that over half of today's climate change that these non-CO2 greenhouse gases are already causing, even as we accelerate the energy transition, including with AI solutions across the board.
Great. So I'm conscious of the time. So actually, Johan, I'm going to go to you and just say, from your end, where do you see partnership opportunities on AI that could really move things forward? So it's not just what individual actors do, but how we work together better that could really accelerate this climate action that we're all sort of pushing toward.
Yeah, and let me come to that. And let me just first, just a little small kind of signal of warning. I just think that one red thread in the discussion here is speed. We recognize now that the only name of the game today is acceleration. The time of incremental change is over. So all the let's say incremental improvements we can do should definitely be implemented very rapidly. Right. But fundamentally, what you started with, Rick, is 6 to 7% emission reductions per year from oil, coal, and gas simply has to happen. It is, after all, 70% of the emissions. I agree, short-lived climate forces are important. We should really go fast on them as well. But fundamentally, we need to attack the big challenge. So I would, for example, argue, Kate, that it's fantastic what you're doing on efficiencies and monitoring data centers. But I think that will be quite an easy trajectory, actually. I mean, green electricity must be an immediate, it's a low-hanging fruit. We should be able to deliver that for all the data centers in the world. It should be implemented within the next 7 years to cut emissions by half by 2030. So we have to have that focus very, very clearly. And that's where I think your question comes up very centrally, to have science, policy, but also the frontier of innovation and business to work much more closely together. We're trying to establish much closer relationships with NASA, ESA, the big satellite remote sensing providers, to connect us with our climate models and the supercomputer capacities we have, to be able to as I mentioned earlier, to really measure the planet, but also to be able to have much higher resolution, real-time information for the methane and the tropospheric ozone, but also the contrails and all the opportunities. It has to be like a vast smorgasbord of action occurring simultaneously right now. And keeping, because my fear is that particularly if I may say so in this room, that many policymakers love the idea that, okay, so now AI will solve 15% of the problem. So now we can go slow on the big items on our fossil fuel phase out. Right. That we do not want to happen. It has to be a simultaneous joint effort on all fronts. And I think that's where the partnership is really important.
Great. That's so well said. So Rick and Jan, and then Kato, also maybe you'll do a bit also of your overall takeaways. But Rick and Jan, can I just, if you had like one final thought of where AI can play a big role on this massive acceleration on climate action that we need, I just wondered if you could share a last thought with us, each of you.
I mean, I'll be very brief. I do think, first let me just be super clear in response to this back and forth, that there's no doubt that we need to do it all in parallel and quickly and faster. And just yesterday, the United States joined the Powering Past Coal Alliance in part to show that actually it's been a decade since we built a new unabated coal power plant in the United States, and we're rapidly phasing out our unabated coal power in the US. We need to pick up the pace on all of that. We are doing everything we can to accelerate renewables and above all to win the energy transition imperative. So no argument there. On the contrary, 100% agreement, as you know from my boss and your many conversations with him. And at the same time, to manage that overshoot risk, if we can complement the energy transition by, of course, ending deforestation and hitting the brakes on non-CO2, it is the fastest way to manage the overshoot risk. So we want to do it all. AI can help us across the board with those different elements. I would say that in the non-CO2 space, there's some particularly interesting elements because the atmospheric chemistry is so complicated, and for governments to be able to really act on things like tropospheric ozone, or for that matter, pinning down where their methane sources are and how to get at them in real time, we need advanced computing to help. And so we have things that are moving along with satellite data for methane sources, including the large sources of emissions from today's oil and gas systems that are emergent. And we have something called the Methane Alert and Response System with the International Methane Emissions Observatory. We need those kinds of institutions to really quickly get at those leaks in the system as they emerge, and have governments and national oil companies respond in real time. And so that's just one of a blizzard of examples, a smorgasbord of examples of where we need to have these new solutions help us to work faster across the energy transition, ending deforestation, including with better data on what's going on with forests, and including forest quality. Degradation of forests is something that's harder to pick up from satellites, but it's the kind of thing that AI could help with. And then finally, cutting non-CO2 superpollutants as an essential complement to the energy transition.
Johan.
Yeah, no, I can just say I totally agree. I think that's the biggest charge we have, to have high resolution measurement of the entire planet, you know, from individual ecosystems all the way to short-lived climate forcers, to the big leaks and emitters. You know, we simply have to have delivery on the Paris Agreement, and the only way to do that is to have accountability. And the accountability has to come with AI-driven planetary monitoring.
And Kate, your one takeaway, but also we've been a part of this discussion, so any other reactions you have?
Yeah, no, indeed. Thank you all. I think this has been an excellent discussion, and I really appreciate the point that you've both underscored around we need to see AI as a further accelerator, as part of moving faster, of moving at speed and scale. So I could not agree with you more. And Rick, I really appreciate, all of your, multiple decades-long leadership on the non-CO2 factors. And thank you for all of your great work. And I'm really thrilled to hear your excitement about AI's potential to accelerate that and provide those insights. So we're very bullish on supporting that work. And Dr. Rockstrom, similarly, all of your critical work and how we can further accelerate understanding of planetary boundaries, some of the fundamental science, huge opportunities, and we also stand ready to continue partnering with you on that further. And I think really, Rich, I think my takeaway is this conversation has reinforced a lot of the findings of the paper about the opportunity that we have, about the way that we need to partner, and the critical opportunity we have to put AI tools in the hands of policymakers, in the hands of scientists, to further accelerate and make more progress in this decisive decade.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. I just want to say two quick things in conclusion, beyond just the privilege to be on stage with Johan and Rick and Kate, who have been such amazing leaders on climate action for a really long time. The first is that we have to deploy trillions of dollars in the years ahead. We have to deploy trillions of dollars to do a massive energy transition, to reshape our whole economy, and to protect people whose lives and livelihoods are at risk from the temperatures that have the rises we've seen and what is baked in, which is unfortunately a very accurate word, into the years ahead. And to me, what gets me most energized is AI, not as a way to not have to make those investments, but to be able to make those investments in the wisest way possible with the greatest impact, and to take advantage where we already have assets or we already have communities to help them optimize best in a challenging world, whether it's to drive more efficiency, whether it's to drive more reduction, whether it's to support communities that are struggling. And I think we're in this unique moment in time where this tool has come along that can help us take this massive investment and make it as smart, as wise, as impactful, as fast as possible. And then I just have to say, on a very personal note, it has been wonderful over this year to have the opportunity to team with Google to take this topic on. I mean, climate and AI have been passions at BCG. They've been passions at Google. It's fun to find kindred spirits in a world of partnering to be on a journey together. And the chance to work with Antonia and with your team for all of us has been great. And I hope that when you have a few moments, probably not these next few days, but maybe on your travels home, you'll have a chance to read the report and then think about whether it's in reduction, whether it's in adaptation, whether it's in other tools, where that could be applicable in the worlds you operate. And from all of us, I think there's a desire to engage, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or ideas, or any of us can be helpful to you. So thanks everyone for joining us. I'll just make a quick connection for you. Is this correct? At bcg.com. Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, have a good day. Enjoy the rest of it. It's great you've been here. Yeah, it's such a privilege.
heat and power that enhances the efficiency for the project moving forward. It takes alternative fuels from the city of Edmonton, actually, and so it's a co-benefit in, to make sure this project is working. It's going to capture 1 million tons a year. 1 million tons a year is a big deal. And so these are the types of projects we're happy to try and support at the International CCS Knowledge Center. We see this as a key project to be able to share lessons learned, not only with the cement sector globally, and including in emerging economies, which have a lot of cement, but also across sectors. I also want to note that there is an offtake partner in place, who's in the audience today with Enbridge, as well as different partners in a hub, Capital Power, a power plant. We're trying to bring these projects together to incent them to move. There's also a lot of community support that goes into this, consultations with Indigenous partners, a lot of people that have a vested interest in what's happening in this project. I can say firsthand that the project in Saskatchewan and Estevan, the community really bought in. People were very interested in wanting this in their economy, in their local jobs. And it has been a project that has brought a lot of life to those communities. And I think that is also something to really be concerned with for emerging and developing economies. When we take these knowledge and lessons learned, we can make those jobs and create jobs. So lastly, I just want to end here by talking about what's happening, what you can expect. 2024, we're going to continue those pilot plant operations. There's going to be continued stakeholder engagement by Heidelberg Materials. They're going to get finalized the government supports for funding in quarter one of next year. Quarter one of next year. In quarter two, we're looking for a final investment decision in June 2024, and we're going to be capturing in 2026. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. This is not my project. We're happy to work with Heidelberg Materials on this project, but of course there are many collaborators on this project as well. The Global Cement and Concrete Association, who you'll hear from, and many of our other partners in the room. So thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Beth. Thank you. And do we have any questions of clarification for Beth? There's one at the back.
Hi, my name is Leanne. I'm from the National University of Singapore. Thank you so much for your presentation. I thought it was really insightful. Could I just ask, are CCUS projects being tied to the carbon markets? And if so, how are those carbon credits being verified?
Wonderful, it's a great question. Actually, for this particular project, the carbon credits go through a compliance system, which is actually really fantastic. Because while there's a CCS Plus initiative happening for voluntary credits for the market to have them, be fungible, tangible, verified globally, what's really great for this project in particular is that it is a government-backed compliance market, which makes it very robust. And so definitely carbon markets have to be a part of the ongoing operations equation for carbon capture and storage facilities. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. If I see no more questions, then Beth, thank you very much. Jonas, I'll get Jonas next. So Jonas Helthes, who's the director of Bologna Europe. Jonas Helthes. Please come up and introduce us to your work in Central and Eastern Europe. Over to you, Jonas.
How's this work? Good morning, everyone, if it's still morning. Just before I start, I don't know if this doesn't seem to work. Oh, perfect. So just quickly, Bologna Foundation, international environmental NGO, founded in Norway back in the 80s. And now we have offices in various countries around the world. We mainly focus on Europe, which is where we are started and where we're based. I'm heading the EU work of Bologna, based in Brussels. Very much of our work is focused on industry. And why is that? Heavy industries like steel, cement, chemicals are sectors that have been, to a large extent, outside of the focus of climate action for a decade, maybe more. And the reason for that has been, to some extent, understandable. The focus has been on energy, on decarbonizing energy, where the biggest chunk of emissions still comes from. But that doesn't give us an opportunity to neglect industry. I think Brad told us earlier, if we don't decarbonize just the cement sector, concrete makes up 8% of world emissions. We cannot meet the targets. And if you add steel and cement and chemicals, the picture is very clear. This is 20%, some countries even closer to 30% of emissions. And that has been a lost decade in terms of action, what we have behind us. We need to move beyond that. And I guess the most frustrating thing about that lost decade is that we have known all along what we should have done. The technology has been available. It's not only about CCS. There are a lot of things we need to decarbonize industry, including direct electrification with renewable energy, hydrogen where that is available at scale. But CCS is part of the portfolio, and in particular for the cement sector, that's crystal clear. So why haven't we done it? For me, this is about just transition. Just transition, when it's been spoken about at the COPs, has very often been about, you know, how do you provide a new future for coal miners that are facing job losses, facing life on the street when the mines close down. But these are industries that actually are not going to close down. These are industries that are building blocks of our future. We need cement. We need concrete to build passive housing. We need concrete to build wind turbines. We need steel for all these things. We need chemicals to isolate our houses. These are not sunset industries, as some call them. These are industries that we need to get ready for the future. And if we don't, we just get hundreds of thousands of workers on the streets protesting climate ambition, protesting climate action. There is no one who wins that conversation. Only losers. So we need to think about how we get this done, and it has to be done in a just way, not only inside Europe or inside, you know, particular countries. It has to happen in a just way across the globe, because we can't have climate action leading to massive job losses in certain places. And so the unions was actually what brought us in Bologna to work on industry as well. I guess we can say it was the other way around. We focused on industry because we knew 20 years ago we had to do that. And unions became one of the key partners. In Norway, that led to that project that Brad was referring to, which is now going to inject CO2 from the cement sector next year. It's the first cement CCS project to be in operation, and that only happened because the unions in Norway worked with us and made that case to politicians. This is about our jobs. This is about securing our future. And so, why is that relevant to other places? Norway had a lot of money. It's a big oil and gas exporter. Could use some of that money to provide the infrastructure, provide the technology, provide basically funding for the project. Is that a model that can be implemented everywhere? Certainly not. But it still has a big relevance to what we're doing elsewhere. And so the access to infrastructure is the key when it comes to carbon capture and storage. And the access to infrastructure in places like the US and in Canada is already there, because the oil and gas industry has been building pipelines for CO2 to use for enhancing oil recovery in those countries. That's not a climate action, that's been something to earn more money. But that means that they have an infrastructure in place. Most of the world doesn't have any infrastructure. And that is already a massive challenge that we have to address. That's also true in Europe. And I think, so as a European NGO, it's not often I give credit to the European Commission. I kind of hope there's no one in the Commission here because it will go to their heads. But they've actually done something which is quite revolutionary. The Commission proposed an obligation on European oil and gas producers to provide access to CO2 storage for industries around Europe based on the share of their oil and gas production in Europe. I don't think we've seen anything of the kind anywhere in the world. An obligation on the extractors, the producers of oil and gas, to provide some of the infrastructure, some of the storage capacity that industries need to decarbonize. And in fact, that has changed the entire conversation in Europe. Because until now, in the NGO community, for good reasons, a lot of people were not so keen to talk about CCS. Why? Because this was seen as something that public money is being used to benefit those that, one, created part of the problem, and two, those who really shouldn't need that public money in order to benefit from something that industry needs, i.e. the oil and gas producers, who need to be part of developing that CO2 storage and also the transport to some extent. So this has changed the conversation. Can Europe sign a letter with us recently? And they've been in the past not willing to talk about CCS. For that reason, they signed a letter saying, we need to support this. We need to support this obligation. And the reason is they understood that you can have an endless conversation about how much CO2 storage we need. How much does the steel industry need? How much does the cement industry need? How much does the chemicals industry need? And then you can talk about circularity. How much can we do with circularity? How much can we do with hydrogen? How much can we do with electrification? These are real conversations. But if you recognize that we need some CO2 storage, it is in society's interest to provide some of the terms for how this is developing in a just way. If you leave that to the market, which doesn't exist today, there's no market because there is hardly any storage, and you leave that to companies that basically operate on 20% return on investment, plus minus, that's not a good deal for society. And it's not a good deal for our industry, and it's not a good deal for the people working in those industries that we need for the future. So we need to set the terms, and I think that brings in a societal conversation about why this is a public good and why we need to provide it. And yeah, we can talk about how much we need, but at the moment, even in the most limited scenarios for CCS, we are so far from having what we need everywhere in the world in terms of storage capacity. Yeah. So, I know. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides because I was going to talk about Central Eastern Europe. We have a project that's been running for a few years now. Why is this relevant? It is relevant because Central Eastern Europe is a region that has been rather absent in the conversation about CCS, also to some extent in the European climate conversation. And it is relevant in the global context because very often in Europe, this has been a pull game between the countries in the West who have more money and the countries in Central Eastern Europe who say, well, we can afford this. If you put a carbon price that is the same on everyone, we are going to go out of business. We don't have the money to provide infrastructure. But infrastructure needs to be provided in a fair way that benefits everyone. And that's why the Norway project is relevant. We didn't do that for the One Norway cement plant. We worked on that project and got the Norwegian government to invest in it because it provides infrastructure that is accessible to every industry site that is on the coast anywhere in Europe and shipping CO2 to that site. But still, we don't have a functional market. We don't have fair access, and that's what we're working on with the European Commission. But so, Central Eastern Europe, the regulations and politics, this shows that what we really need is capacity building, awareness. In the countries there, you have some countries that are banning CO2 storage, some countries that are opening for it, and there's a lot of confusion, there's very little awareness, very little knowledge, but all of those countries have cement. All those countries have production of different chemicals. They need this. So building capacity, building understanding in those countries that this is important for them. And it's not important for the oil and gas producers in the North Sea, it is for their industries and their future, is what we're doing there. Joining up with local partners, with unions, and what we can see now, and this is so exciting, by 2030, we have planned projects in our region. These are all projects that you see on this map, are all projects that are either infrastructure projects or that are linked to cement, which is a core part of this, or they are cement plants that are planning to capture CO2. This has been developing in the course of those 3 years we've been doing this project. It doesn't mean that all of those will go ahead, but it shows that once you start having that conversation with stakeholders, with the unions, with the people who understand this is about their future, things move very quickly. So I know Tim is going to cut me off very soon, but before we do that, actually I'm going to leave this. I'm going to leave this map here. I want to talk about 2 more things. We need to create a race to the top. How do we create a race to the top? And how do we make sure that race to the top is benefiting everyone? The race to the top is done by creating demand for low carbon products. If we run on a model where CCS projects in cement and other sectors need to have public investment, need to have $1 billion spent by government in order to get started, that's not a model that benefits everyone. That's a model that can only be implemented in a few places. If we run a model where we talk about how to create a market for low carbon concrete, we have studies that show that the incremental price for low carbon concrete is between 1% and 5% over normal concrete. That's nothing. If you look at public procurement requirements in any country, any other requirement has a smaller impact on the cost than that. So we need to turn this around, we need to create markets, because that's how you get projects started everywhere, if they have access to infrastructure. And so that brings me to my last point, which is not on the slide, I don't know why I keep doing that. The last point is the access to infrastructure has to be a global task. Just like we say in Europe, the access to infrastructure in Europe is a European task, because we have a carbon price, everyone has a penalty. If there is no infrastructure, you don't have a functioning market anymore. So on a global level, we need to do the same. We need to raise funds to provide infrastructure everywhere where there's industry. And we actually have a proposal for that, which I'm not going to talk about now. I'm just going to tell you guys to come to our pavilion on the 9th of December at 11 o'clock, Building 88, B7. We're going to talk about a proposal that we have to use the border carbon adjustment mechanism that Europe is introducing from 2026. Use that to create a global fund that can be used to provide access to infrastructure for industries that are, being targeted by that border carbon adjustment, which is supposed to protect European industry from imports that don't have a carbon legislation. And use that to provide access that can turn this race into a race to the top. So I'm looking forward to see you all there, 9th of December, 11 o'clock. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I think, thank you, Jonas. Very significant as well, the letter of support from Climate Action Network Europe for the European Commission's proposals on a storage capacity obligation. We can take one question for Jonas. Do we have one question of clarification? If not, that was very clear. Jonas, thank you very much for that. And now, do you want to go next? Okay. We'll go now to Ruth Herbert from the Carbon Capture and Storage Association in the UK to talk to us about decarbonising cement projects in the UK.
Thank you, Tim. Do I just press the green button?
Oh.
So I represent over 100 companies who are active around the world, but are mainly based in the UK. We also have around 20% of company members who are based in the EU and about 25% that are based around the world. And so we're a trade association and we cover capture, transport and storage activities, the supply chain for those, and also the service sector, which is a growing sector. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the UK, but also try to relate that to what might be happening in other countries as well. So that's a bit about us, which I've just said. So the UK Cluster Programme was launched really to enable the government to reach its net zero strategy. So that was published in October 21, and that set an ambition to capture and store 20 to 30 million tonnes of CO2 a year by 2030, and to establish 4 clusters around the UK to do that. Why clusters? Because that's lots of different types of assets, whether that's a power station or an industrial site or something else, all sharing the same CO2 infrastructure. So that's a cheaper way of putting this infrastructure in. The funding, however, wasn't confirmed until 2023. So that was in the budget earlier this year, and there was 20 billion a year for support for those capture projects. The clusters actually in the UK are all emerging in the industrial regions. Why? It's the same thing that Jonas was just saying. Those industries don't really see a future for themselves in a decarbonised economy without carbon capture and storage. So any industry that has process emissions that come from heating materials, so rock in the case of cement, or other types of materials in other industries, that release CO2 without CCS, even if they manage to electrify or other thing, or their actual heat, they wouldn't be able to deal with the process emissions. And a lot of these industries need really, really hot fuels that can get things really, really hot. And so they're still looking at liquid fuels into the future. So they are looking around the UK. We looked at this last year. There's around 70 million tonnes that wanted to deploy by 2030, and that could create around 70,000 new jobs in these industries, as well as protecting 77,000 jobs in these communities. And we've got, you know, our industrial sites around the coast, but we have got some inland as well that we will look at how to reach. For example, in Derbyshire, there's cement, so you'll see the peat cluster there in Derbyshire. I don't know whether you can see it on here, but it's in the middle of the country between HyNet Northwest and East Coast Cluster, and that's where all of our lime and cement is. And our lime comes from the hills there in Derbyshire. That needs to be decarbonised, and so they're looking at a pipeline across to either HyNet Northwest or Morecambe Bay stores. At the moment, we've got 2 clusters in Track 1 with 8 capture projects going through negotiations with the government for a CFD, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then we've got 2 other clusters, so the Scottish cluster and the Viking cluster, who are in Track 2, also starting discussions with the government about how to move forward with government support. But as you can see, we've got clusters all around the country, so there's more than 4 that need to move forward. So what is that government support? What is the 20 billion for? Well, it's for something that we call in the UK the industrial carbon capture business model. But essentially what it is a carbon contract for difference. So this is something that pays for the additional cost of operating with carbon capture minus the CO2 price, which obviously, because we have an emissions trading scheme in the UK, you would have to pay if you weren't capturing the emissions. But of course you avoid paying if you are capturing the emissions. So it just pays for the difference. So in some cases, we think that in the early 2030s onwards, that difference is actually going to be negative, as in the carbon price will rise such that the cost of doing CCS makes sense just to avoid the carbon price. But in the interim period, the government has put in place the contracts for difference. It's a very smart way of incentivising and supporting capture, because it really minimises the subsidy to just the level that's needed. And over time, as the CO2 price rises, the subsidy goes to 0. So we think it's quite smart, but we're still waiting to sign one of these contracts in the UK, and that's earmarked for next year. So case study, one of the 8 projects I mentioned earlier in the Track 1 clusters, they're actually attached to the HyNet cluster in the northwest, is Hanson's Padeswood cement work. So Hanson is part of Heidelberg, that you might have heard of. So they are planning to capture 800,000 tonnes a year of CO2 and transport it and store it in the HyNet cluster. And as I said before, the final investment decisions for all of those 8 projects that the government's negotiating with is earmarked for around September next year, and they aim to be up and running by 2027. So as far as we're concerned, this couldn't come soon enough with the climate emergency, but it's good to have something now that everybody is focused on aiming for. That's a picture of the plant. I visited it myself this year. The people that work there are hugely excited about this, especially the younger people that work on the site with young children. They've seen themselves as part of kind of the problem. It's a dirty industry and so forth with a lot of CO2 emissions. They are so excited to have the chance to decarbonise, and it's actually making people really want to continue working at the plant and work really hard to get this project to happen. And I just wanted to say as well, you know, we've been looking at this. You know, Hanson's a UK arm, but it's an international company. Heidelberg have plants all over the world. So they're going to be able to go and repeat this elsewhere, and they are doing it for quicker in other places, right? So, but what this is also interesting is in this cluster there is also plans to put carbon capture on a refinery. An Indian company, SR Energy Transition, have announced 3.6 billion only last week, basically the week just gone, to put carbon capture on their refinery and do hydrogen production, all using the same CO2 infrastructure. And the reason I met with their senior team, and the reason that they're doing this is because they see the opportunity to use the CFD and the subsidy in the UK to learn how to do that, and they're going to roll that out around the world, including back in India where they have a lot of refineries. So this is actually an international collaboration. It doesn't really matter where the first sites are, or whether they're even the first sites, but this is, people are going to go at this at their own rate, but essentially that knowledge is going to lead to deployment around the world. We looked at our own project pipeline. As I said, we did a study and found that 70 million tonnes of demand for CCS around the UK by 2030. That was last year. We updated it this year and we found that that pipeline had already grown. If you want to know, I mean, there are 90 million tonnes worth of projects around the UK. A lot of those are existing. About a third of those are new businesses that would come into the UK and set up new energy or essentially industrial businesses. For example, one energy park had a new company that was built creating green net zero building materials, and they wanted to be located in one of these clusters. So there's actually potentially greenfield new industrial sites that want to come and be near the hydrogen and CO2 infrastructure. So this isn't just a plan to retain the industry you've got. If you're a country that wants to industrialise for the first time, or in the case of the UK, maybe re-industrialise down a few avenues, then having this infrastructure really does attract business from around the world to locate in your country. And you can look at all the projects that want to have CCS through look at the QR code there and go and have a look at them. And you'll see it's a mixture of existing huge employers in regions, but also exciting new companies that are really innovating in the green transition. So in summary, there was 20 billion. We have 12 clusters. Only 4 of them are actually moving forward. We have 94 million tonnes of interest in CCS, but we have 8 projects in negotiation with the government, which is only around 10% of that. A third of the project pipeline said that they were quite mobile, so they can go to any country that's going to offer them this infrastructure. But a third of projects said they would look somewhere else or close. So some of those were brownfield sites, existing sites, if they don't have clarity in the next year or so. And the point about this is industry now is looking already at their next 5-year investment plans. So they need to know if this infrastructure is going to be there in the 2030s when they want it. Otherwise, they're going to de-invest. They're going to slowly, they're not going to, maintain those plants. They're not going to build anything new, and that's a huge risk for those communities. So what can we do about it? We're all trying to think of ideas about how we can go from 4 clusters to 12 clusters in the UK, how we can get this started in other countries. So we've done a paper with Oxford Net Zero looking at what beyond those early, the CFDs and the government support, which I think is so crucial in the next 10 years, but how do we start now putting in place frameworks that will drive wider deployment in the 2030s? Because all of these industrial regions need to continue making the products that we use, products like cement that we're using for the transition. And so we've published a paper, we've got a workshop next week looking at what market developments, more robust ETS, carbon border adjustment mechanism, low carbon product standards, which Jonas mentioned, which I think are going to be incredibly important here, but also including putting those potentially on oil and gas. So what is it going to take to drive deployment of this technology more broadly? So if you're interested in this, please download the paper. I think the workshop might be full now, but we're going to carry on this dialogue and maybe do some online workshops as well. So please let us know if you're interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And we have time for one question of clarification for Ruth. Does anybody have a question of clarification? If not, we'll move on swiftly because we'll take questions at the end as well. Thank you very much, Ruth. And now I'd like to invite Claude Laria from the Global Cement and Concrete Association.
thank you, and good day, everyone. Where the slider? You are putting the first slide in, right? Okay. I will start, and I don't want to repeat what you heard, but I cannot start without saying that concrete, yes, is an essential building material, and our forecast is that the demand for this essential product is going to grow. And I've been asked to focus on the developing world, and is actually even more important for the developing world. So the need to build, resilient infrastructure, resilient cities, green infrastructure is even going to be higher in the developing world. So this is also where we expect the demand to grow. And this was backed up by Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, to say, yes, 3/4 of the infrastructure that will exist in 2050 has yet to be built. So that's really to illustrate where we are talking about here. But as we are today, this is production of cement today is 7% of global CO2 emissions. So this is why the GCCA and its members, we developed a roadmap we committed to deliver net zero concrete to the world by 2050, and we developed a plan on how we can achieve this. And the first part of this plan is, of course, to use the levers that we know today, the low-hanging fruits that we can still push further. So it's about efficiencies in design, efficiencies in construction, using better the concrete, using the concrete more efficiently. It's all the levers that we know. It's, of course, fossil fuel substitution, energy efficiency measures, new blends, new formulation in the making of cement that are less clinker-intensive, clinker being the energy-intensive product and the CO2-intensive product. It's the greening of electricity need. It's recarbonation of cement and enhance this potential of concrete to absorb CO2 and to act as a CO2 sink. But at the end of the day, to close the loop, to get to net zero, we reckon that 1/3 of our emission reduction are going to come for carbon capture, use and storage. So it's important. And if we want to look this into the bigger picture without duplicating what Tim presented, but that's the MPP sectoral transition strategy, and it estimates the need for CCUS to decarbonize 7 sectors to top to 4 gigatons per year. We reckon in our roadmap we will need 1.3 gigatons. So it's huge what we have to develop. And it's a huge challenge, and we are working on it, and we will see it. We see more projects, of course, in the developed world, but we are also working in preparing for this transition in the developing world. So the technologies, they exist. So we heard this today, the technologies are there. Some are still at a rather low TRL level, and we are actually doing all the work we do to also move up, and have the technologies at higher TRL that will also help, of course, to optimize, to make the technologies more efficient, but also to drive the cost of the technologies down, because it's still expensive as we see it. And this is now one of the key challenges today, is as long as we don't have the business case for CCUS, without support from governments, without grants, without the type of scheme we have seen in the UK, we can't build those projects. So we need to have the business case for CCUS. So the business case to support the technical risk, to support the regulatory risk, the financial risk. So there are still many risks there that we have to cover. And then, of course, we also have all the operating risk to cover. So we need a carbon price. This is essential. We need a carbon price, and we need low procurement policies to help to make the business case. But we also need many other things. We need infrastructure for transport and storage. We need renewable energy. A carbon capture plant in cement will at least double the need for electricity. So that electricity needs to be renewable. So there are a lot of parameters that need to come to build a business case. This is a map of current project. This is a collaboration between the GCCA and Lead It, and this is all the carbon capture project that you have in the cement industry. This is called the Green Cement Technology Tracker. You can download there detailed data about all the plans. And actually what I want to show here, you can look at this in detail and look at all projects, but what I want to highlight here is that you see a big concentration of projects in Europe and in the US. So this is clearly what we see. There are some projects elsewhere in the world we heard about, and they are not all yet on the plan, but there are now, as far as I know, 4 projects in China, 4 CCUS in cement. But yes, most of the projects are in Europe. And of course, it's because there are significant investment there and support schemes for the project. We have the EU Innovation Fund, you have the US Reduction Act, and all the policies that were introduced by Brad earlier. And actually, in other geographies in the developing world, we are really facing a lack of support, but also a lack of carbon pricing. I mean, the enabling framework is not there to make the case for CCUS. And this is where we are with the GCCA. We have a collaboration with the Clean Energy Ministerial. We are collaborating with governments, but we are also collaborating with our members. So I showed our roadmap, our global roadmap, but we also have a net zero delivery program, project accelerator, where we are working together with the countries and the regions to develop national roadmaps or regional roadmaps, but also working on what are the policy needs in that region, what are the enabling policies that need to be developed, and working on lighthouse project. So that's the map. You see the countries where there is a roadmap, the countries where we have initiated discussions about the roadmap, or where roadmap are in progress. And there, and this is really what I want to focus now, is we have worked out kind of typical national project contact for CCUS in a country. Because whilst we are waiting to get the right enabling framework and working in getting the right enabling framework, there is already quite some work that can be done, because we need to be ready to deploy that technology by 2030. And so this is a project that now we have initiated in India with the Global CCS Institute. I think it's a great collaboration where we are looking at mapping the sources, the cement plants in India, and also mapping the hubs and the storage options. We will, of course, then work on the enabling policy framework with the Indian governments and GCCA India. We have the backup of the GCCA India CEOs for this project, so members are now submitting where they think we could have lighthouse project, and the idea is really to find 2-3 lighthouse projects in India. And we're already talking about what could be the next country to develop this program. I think we have seen a very interesting project as was in Nigeria, which served as a model to build this project. And this is really what we are doing to help the developing world also benefit from the learning. And as an addition, as the GCCA, we have recently as well developed a handbook for our members together with the CCS, International CCS Knowledge Center, actually, to also help our members. Okay, if I want to do a CCUS project, what do I need to look at? What are the questions? Because it's not only about the technologies, it's around a lot of other topics. So to sum up, because I think I'm getting close to my 10 minutes, so the technology works, but we need to finance and de-risk the technology. We need to be ready to deploy. The 1.3 gigaton is 1 plant per week as from 2030, that we will need to equip. I like to repeat that number to give us an idea of the scale of the job here ahead of us. We need to develop the infrastructure, and this is where governments are key, or stakeholders, national stakeholders, develop the infrastructure for the transport and the storage, the mapping, and then ensure the supporting policies. to help us to make the business case for CCUS. Thank you very much, and I'm here for questions.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Thank you. Do we have any questions or clarification for Claudia before we move to more general Q&A? If we don't, Claudia, thank you very much. If you'd like to take your seat, and can I invite Brad Crabtree to join the panel for the Q&A at the end? Thanks. And we'll just open it up for general questions now on anything to do with CCS on cement or anything on CCS in general. And I thought that was very useful already, thinking about the question that we've got. Can developments in CCS on the cement industry in developed countries move fast enough to help developing countries? And before we've even got the first plant operating next year, the Global Cement and Concrete Association are helping India move along and considering CCS for there. So that's very good to learn of that, Claudia. Thank you. So do we have any questions for the panel at all? Yes, we've got one over there, please. Oh, can you wait for the microphone, because we've got people online as well. Thank you. If you could say your name and affiliation as well, would be helpful. Thank you.
My name is Jacob Domwer. I'm a junior at Moravian University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. You mentioned, this is for Dr. Romanak, you mentioned that over time the carbon that's stored turns into limestone, or it crystallizes, right? Yeah, right. So I was wondering how long would it take to, like, once all the carbon crystallizes, does that mean that that storage facility is full? And if so, how long do you think carbon storage is a viable option for
So it's not the mineralization that will necessarily limit the storage capacity. It's more of a pressure of the initial, it's more a function of the initial pressure and porosity, permeability, all of those things in the formation. So really it will be limited before it will be crystallized. So the crystallization will not be the limiting factor.
Yeah, so like, just to add on, like, do you think that this will be, like, carbon storage will be like an option for, like, my great-grandkids, like, tenfold over?
Well, that's a really good question, and the assessments that we have right now are that we have orders of magnitude more storage than we need. So, that's going to all bear out, because we also need storage to be in a certain location. But, basically now we've got orders of magnitude more storage than we need.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. We have a question in the middle of the... Alina, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Elina Levin. I'm from the Global CCS Institute. And first of all, I just wanted to congratulate Tim and Catherine and all the panelists for putting together this session to talk about CCS as a matter of fact, as guided by reality, economics, and science, and away from ideology, because I know some people are still shy to talk about CCS. So it's great that we're having this conversation today in the UNFCCC context, and I hope there'll be more of those conversations. I have two questions about emerging economies. And I think we're here in Dubai, we see all the constructions going on, and that's probably the site of the future in many emerging economies. So one question, maybe more for Brad and other governments, in terms of geological storage assessment. Are there any collaborations, or can we envisage a global collaboration on storage potential estimation and assessments, so that infrastructure that every speaker mentions, that is there when the industry is ready to start capturing and storing CO2. So one question on that, and another one is on funds. We have Global Climate Fund that hasn't funded any of the CCS projects yet. So what does it take for the Global Climate Fund to start funding CCS on cement? Because as we heard, CCS is one of the critical components of decarbonizing cement sector. Given the construction that will be happening in developing emerging economies, all of them will need CCS on their cement and concrete plants. So how can we leverage or direct investments in CCS plants in emerging economies? Because we know in developed countries, Brad mentioned about US support, we heard from Ruth about support in the UK, so that how to get that support in developing countries through the funds.
Okay, Alina, thank you very much. Now, just to make everyone aware, I think the mics get cut on the hour promptly, so the speakers will take questions outside afterwards as well. I can see the lights flashing with 1 minute, so if Brad and then Catherine can answer those 2 questions, but the panellists will be available afterwards outside the room to continue answering questions if we don't get to you. So okay. Brad first.
So 2 quick responses. On resource characterization, that is an area that we are working bilaterally with a number of countries to support their efforts on characterizing geologic storage potential. There needs to be more resources devoted globally to that. It's probably one of the it's fundamental to projects moving forward. It's also probably the least cost, most impactful way governments in wealthy countries can contribute to deployment in the global south. There are other enabling things that relate to that. Regulatory geologic storage frameworks, the regulation that's necessary for projects to have financial certainty. We're working with a number of countries in the global south to help them develop regulatory frameworks for geologic storage. I would identify both those things as priorities that fit together. And then the second question, as far as the funds, there's actually multiple funds. There's the one you mentioned. And then there's also the fact that the World Bank CCUS fund is ending, and we want to make sure that there's a fund that continues after that, a new fund. We need countries like the United States, through their directors at the World Bank and other multilateral institutions, need to start getting coordinated and applying pressure. This will also be an area of focus for the Carbon Management Challenge, so that we could be over 20 countries here in a few months. And one of the things that we'll be starting to do next year is coordinating efforts and joint priorities to engage together. That's part of the whole point of that effort, to have a global voice.
Catherine, do you want to just say something on the Green Climate Fund?
Well, I mean, we've been working for years to try to mobilize funds from the Green Climate Fund, and I think we're real close. So it's looking good, I think, maybe for a start. But hopefully, if we can open it up, then we'll get more countries being funded.
Okay, and the mics have not been cut yet, so can we take your question?
So Adam Sweet from Edmonton, Canada. 2 quick questions. One, because this requires knowledge sharing amongst companies who are largely competitors, can the panel speak to how do you get those competitors to work together? And the second piece around shared liability, where you have the producer of the CO2, the person who's maybe getting it to the person who's going, or the company that's putting it under. How do you, particularly maybe in the UK context, how is that being addressed in terms of the shared liability in the case of something going sideways?
Hello, excuse me. Unfortunately, we need to prepare the room for the next event.
Perfectly
so I'll
understandable.
kindly ask you to answer the question.
We'll get that question answered outside. Thank you very much all for coming and for being interested. And thank you to the panel. Hi, are you IISD? Yes. Oh, yeah.
I put my bag there, so that's why it was time.
So energy storage is going to be the next problem, and I hope you are going to talk about that as well. And last but not least, when new technologies come, people have a lot of fear, and we have to deal with fear. It doesn't matter what I'm talking about. It doesn't really. What matters is who is listening to me. Are those people who are exposed to new things, new technologies, which might be dangerous, are they sitting here? What comes first for them? The first issue, security. Second, security. Third, security. And then number 4, 5, 6, we can talk about many other things, but we need to talk to people who face something they have never faced before, NIMBY. Not in my backyard. Now these technologies are in our backyard, and we have to talk to people about the safety as well of this technology. For example, artificial intelligence. And my last speaking point is that, you know, we are connected. Everything is connected with everything else, as the famous American ecologist said. So this interconnectedness is very relevant for industry. Each segment of industry has to develop in a parallel fashion. If one segment is lagging behind, the rest cannot develop. So interconnectedness also means developing together. I do hope I gave you some fruits for talk and some hope for the discussion that we have to talk about it, but remember, we have to talk to those people as well for whom these issues matter. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And really, we always say at Huawei, passion unlocks potential. And I'm very proud to call on stage our next speaker, Vicky Zhang, who is the Vice President of Corporate Communications at Huawei, and who I'm honored to call my colleague.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, please allow me to send another welcome to you at this session at COP28 to discuss the green innovation. And also thank you, Barbara. You gave a remarkable, opening statement. And I totally agree with you that although we have a lot of progress on the Paris Agreement, but more challenges are in front of us. And we need solutions, and we need actions. We need actions. And also the climate change, pollutions, and less resources are reminding us actions must be taken faster than before to realize the sustainable future for next generation. So to bring this vision to reality, one of the most powerful tools are innovation. We all agree that innovation has the potential to entirely change the way we live, we work, and the interaction with the environment. But however, where does the innovation come from? So as a starter, we should recognize that the skills and talent are the key power to drive the technology innovation. And following this logic, so today we're very proud to announce we have a new report that names Twin Skills for the Twin Transition, defining green digital skills and jobs. The report was co-worked by Huawei Athena Research Center, Sustainable Development Union under AE Forio, and also under the leadership of Professor Phoebe, and also PwC. The report focused on developing a new classification for green skill that will define the causes of action to reskill and upskill people, to build and spread net zero technology that needed to achieve the Paris Agreement objectives. And our dear friend Phoebe will briefing you details about the report in the next session. And Huawei has always taken the education and provide trainings very seriously. Since 2008, we roll out our flagship program named Seeds for the Future. And until now,
It's active and run in 150 countries, and 2.2 million young people has already benefited from this program through scholarship, competition, and also providing the technical trainings. And as an example, our ICT Academy has collaboration with more than 2,600 universities globally. And these are the joint efforts to providing skills to people. And today, we need to add the green skills into the session and into all the courses to more people. So in the green digital era, where we see the increased need for a faster energy transition, just as you mentioned, just the European Union alone will need more than 1 million solar workers to restore the higher renewable energy target by 2030. And from the everyday business side, such opportunities will also mostly relevant to installing PV. So as Huawei, we're also a player in this area. We already increasing this kind of training for the local talent, especially the installers. In this year, in 2023, we already provided more than 1,000 training sessions to tens of thousands of installers globally. And from the R&D side, we are investing cutting-edge technologies to driving breakthrough development on sustainability technology. And last year, the investment into research and development of Huawei has achieved the highest rate. That's the 25% of the company's total revenue. The path to sustainable future lies on our hand. So we must emphasize that the education, collaboration, research, and let everyone join the efforts towards a sustainable future. That's the key to a digital transition. And for the digital skills, my wishes to all is never stop learning, never stop exploring, never stop challenging, and please never stop growing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicky. And now let me call on stage Professor Phoebe Konduri, who really doesn't need an introduction, but she will walk us through the findings of this work that we have done together.
Thank you, Barbara, for your amazing, provocative, but not so much thoughts, because as chair of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network Global Climate Hub, we work on each one of them. And I think that you summarized the main points that we need to accelerate, the main focus of our acceleration if something is going to really change, if we are going to achieve the transformations that we need. Thank you very much for having me here. It has been a huge pleasure working with Huawei. It has been a journey to find the road towards retrieving the answer for the very crucial question, I think one of the most crucial questions for this transformation: what will be the jobs that will create the capacity for the transition, for the green and digital transition to actually take place. 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't been invented yet. And we all know that in order to achieve a transition, it's not just a transition, it's a transformation, we need social cohesion. no big transformation can be achieved in conflict. We need cooperation, collaboration, and social cohesion. And in order to have social cohesion, you need stakeholder engagement. And in order to engage the stakeholders, you need to give them, to empower them with the capacity to be engaged in the transformation. And this means you need to empower them with the skills and knowledge to become co-designers of the transformation, to become owners of the transformation, to become stakeholders of the transformation. And in order to do that, you need education, vocational training, upskilling and reskilling. And this is what we try to uncover through our research with Highway. So, I lead this Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation on I4IA. Very quickly, this is an alliance of research and innovation centers, innovation accelerators, science policy networks, and science associations and academies that bring together a lot of resources and a lot of researchers working on the sustainability transition. First, we measure ESG, SDG performance and work on sustainable pathways, then financing pathways, then we work on climate neutrality and resilience pathways, seas and ocean pathways, water, food, energy nexus pathways, and of course, innovation, acceleration, education, upskilling, and reskilling. And it's the last thematic that really covers the work that we do with Highway. In order to understand what kind of jobs and skills we need to understand where our direction. Our direction is very explicitly defined in the 17 SDGs, UN Agenda 2030, 17 SDGs, 169 targets, 250 KPIs. Every year we measure the performance of each and every country across these targets and KPIs. And not only that, but we downscale from global to regions of the world, for example, European, and then from European to country level, and then from country level to cities level and regions within nations level, and then we are even able to downscale to company level. So measuring the performance against the SDGs is important, but because this is the only global agenda at the moment. Together with the Charter of UN Human Rights, there is no other global agreement. We have 163 countries agreeing to implement these SDGs. So this is the general policy framework. Our report, and you can find it here, is more focused on Europe, but it also elaborates beyond Europe. But let us focus on Europe first. So we have a very detailed and explicit description of the green and digital European policies. The flagship policy is, of course, the European Green Deal. And within that European Green Deal, we find the aspects of green, digital, industrial policy, just transition policy. And we bring together all these policies in order to sketch what is needed in terms of jobs and skills to implement these policies. So let me go very quickly. This is how we are doing in terms of implementing the SDGs. Not good enough. We are on the blue line and the projection on the dotted blue line. We need to increase our pace of implementation seriously. We need to be on the green line. And the darker blue means higher implementation. The lighter blue means lower implementation. And we do that at different scales. Europe, Greece, we do this for every country of the world. subnational regions within Greece. We do this for every country in the world. And we can also map and identify the SDG content in trade. So for example, we can tell you how much of the deforestation of Brazilian forests is really attributed to goods and products that are produced, that are consumed in Europe. So we can measure what is going on with regards to the SDGs. And we also know exactly with a global stock stage how much of our pledges with regards to climate change is actually being implemented. So these are the global policies, the layer of SDG 13, and the relevant global pledges, and then we go to Europe. This is how we treat the data in this report. European Green Deal for access become climate neutral by 2050, zero pollution, clean tech leadership by European companies, leave no one behind, just transition. We have 1 trillion supporting this. And in addition to this 1 trillion, for the different aspects of the European green policies, we have Next Generation EU that was launched after COVID to help Europe recover from COVID in a green and digital way. And there is where green and digital was explicitly identified. So what does green and digital future mean? A green and digital future means that we invest in decarbonizing power generation and industry, promoting circular economy, protecting and restoring biodiversity, and strengthening sustainable mobility. What is digital? Improve cybersecurity, deploy cutting-edge technologies, helping deploy digital skills, and improving connectivity. So these are the skills we need to empower our labor force in order to implement the green and digital transition. And to further articulate the transition, Europe has a climate law, the first time that the obligation to become climate neutral by 2050 is now a legal obligation. 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to what we had in 1990, and climate neutrality 2050. In addition, we have the streamlining of capital towards sustainable investment. This is the EU taxonomy. The EU taxonomy says, I will give you a cheap loan if your investment is about climate mitigation, adaptation, sustainable use of water, sustainable use of oceans, circular economy, and pollution control. And not only that, you also have the Corporate Sustainability Directive that obliges big companies to submit a sustainability report that is very detailed in the informational requirement, and it is also monitored and assessed and digitally tagged. So in this kind of world, and with the Fit for 55, the 13 legislative proposals that are refining the regulation across Europe with regards to the energy system, the ETS, the land use and forest system, mobility, cars, vans, aviation, shipping. Most of them have been voted in 2023, so now these are legal requirements. We have a big framework, a big regulatory, legal, and policy framework, which basically tells us what are the skills and occupations that we need in order to implement. And together with the green and digital policies, you need to add the digital policies of Europe. We have a Digital Service Act, a Digital Market Act, European Chips Act, European Digital Identity, Artificial Intelligence, European Data Strategy, Space Strategy, European Defense Strategy, EU-US Trade and Technology Strategy, and we also have have the Destination Earth initiative, which is about creating a digital twin with regards to the human effects on natural environment, which basically allows us to simulate the green and digital transition on the environment. And we also have the industrial policy that is focusing on accelerating the twin transitions. So what we did, we put together all these policies in an AI-driven, data-driven method, and we've identified the new set of green and digital skills. These are the policies we've considered. We did it for all sectors in an aggregated mode. We did it by sector: agri, forestry, fishing, construction, energy, ICT, manufacturing, transport, water treatment. And we also identified the explicit skills that we are needing, green and digital, and then combine those skills into solid occupations for the future. So we have a holistic map of what we are going to be needing in order to implement all the policies that I've shown you before. So it's a data-driven framework that allows us to classify skills, knowledges, occupations in the EU labor market. We find that the demand for occupations with a high green and digital score has significantly increased since 2015 in all sectors. The skills classified as the most digital and jointly most digital and green are the most demanded skills for all occupations, even today. And we also provide the recommendations for universities and for vocational training in order to fill the gap in the need for the green and digital skills and accelerate the transition. We use the European Skills, Competence, Qualifications and Occupations Framework. It's a huge data that basically classifies European skills, competences and knowledge concepts, relations between occupations and skills and knowledge, and basically allows you to use all this data to answer the question which skills and knowledge concepts are relevant for each of the occupations. Then what we we use the classifications and hierarchies provided by this database, and we develop a data-driven scoring model to classify occupations on their level of greenness, digitalization, and jointly greenness and digitalization. And we have an explicit ranking of the most needed occupations in the green sphere, in the digital sphere, and combined in the green and digital sphere. For example, smart home engineer, smart home installer, geothermal technician, green ICT consultant, but I will let you look at the report because it's very detailed in the data analysis. We also find that employment growth of green and digital skills is very strong, and we have a significant effect on employment growth in art and recreation sectors, finance and insurance, ICT, professional services, manufacturing, and energy supply services. We also do an analysis of the advertisements, current state of advertisements, job openings, and we find that the top green and digital skills and knowledge concepts are among the most requested skills in online job advertisements. So again, a second confirmation of the validity of the green and digital skills we have identified as the most wanted ones. Finally, the recommendations for universities and vocational training. We need our universities to restructure, to transform their curricula. They need to be more holistic, more integrated in order to support the sustainability transition, and they need to be more focused on the new jobs that are going to be created that are able to support and empower the green and digital transition. And we give recommendations by sector. The financial sector, mainstreaming ESGs and enhancing ESGs and SDG matrices. Energy sector, we need technical energy, knowledge on energy efficiency measures, on renewable energy technologies, on energy markets with regards to manufacturing, raw material collection, pre-processing, production, distribution, trade, sustainable business and product development, agriculture and food, again, many skills that need to be advanced, wastewater treatment, improved packaging, sensoring and process control, water and waste, water reduction and so on. In the report, you will find the exact definition of all of these occupations. And in addition, we also provide recommendations with regards to specific skills. With regards to green skills, we need renewable energy expertise, energy efficiency, circular economy, environmental regulations, and with regards to digital skills, data analysis, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, AI, and machine learning. All is detailed in the report. I don't have time to explain in detail and communicate in detail the wealth of information there, but you can look at the report. It should be able to give you to scan the idea of the report, but I'll give the floor to Georgia, and I will come back with the technical use of this. I will fix it from inside.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. Thank you indeed. What an insightful work that we have conducted together. We have chosen skills, of course, as a way to accelerate green innovation, but it's not the only solution. It's not the only option we have, of course. It's at the base, skills and education. So let's now gather to our panel and discuss the different ways and the different solutions and ideas our panelists have on how to accelerate green innovation. Ladies first, I would like to start with Rea Mariani, who is a technical director at the Regenerative Foundation. The floor is yours to give us your pitch.
Thank you very much. I think there is a presentation with a video. If it is not on, I'm just going to start. So the Regenerative Society Foundation is a business-led foundation established in 2020 and by 19 companies, cross-sector companies, gathering together to doing what? To work on the basis of knowledge, technical competence, and efforts to change their core businesses and their business models, because this is what the ecological transition means. And to do so, you need skills, you need technology solutions, you need to pull together digital and green technologies. And this is one of the results I'm going to present. I'm going to present two solutions that we developed. One with a French medium-sized company, which is a strategic partner of the Dassault, which is a leading company in the provision of ecosystems and platforms, such as a famous space for the build-up of digital twins. I was coming with a video that is showing this amazing solution that we developed and is being implemented at the moment, right now, at the École Polytechnique, which is the largest polytechnical school in France. This digital twin is 70% less data heavy than comparable solutions. Why is that important? For the reasons that both Barbara and Phoebe and Huawei Vice President were mentioning. The huge energy and resource consumption related to the ICT sector. 4% currently of energy consumption is going to become 20% by 2040. We need to become extremely efficient. We do that, and I do say we, because the French company BeamCube is partnering with me for the development of this integrated system that is putting climate and environmental KPIs using European methodologies, the product environmental footprint and the organizational environmental footprint that are being developed with the European Commission over the past 15 years. That's very important. The leadership role of the European Commission and Europe as a whole as trendsetter, standard setting. This is very important. Regulation drives innovation. So what do? We have this digital twin, which is taking care of not only mirroring the reality of the entire campus of the École Polytechnique, which is 22,000 square meters of buildings, hectares, and with a thoroughfares that brings together 150,000 people every day. This is a campus. This campus needs to be renovated energetically, in terms of water consumption, resource consumption, from here up to 2026, under the Recovery Fund of France. Another thing that Phoebe was mentioning. The digital twin is managing this, mirroring the reality, predicting the reality, and anticipating the changes. And also, we integrated public procurement, and I'm going to be closing because all the other speakers need to speak as well. Public procurement right today, Barbara, the WTO announced the 10 points, regulations and suggestions for policies for changing the trade system to make it more sustainable. Among these points, there is public procurement and public procurement of innovation. 13 trillion a year are mobilized in public procurement. And this is the same thing that we're doing in Europe. I'm working also with DG Grow, the Director General for the internal market, to work on the 15% points of GDP that every year the European Union is committing to public procurement. So we transformed the way public procurement for the works, the renovation works, are going to be realized. This is a total budget of 350 million for the whole reconstruction, renovation of the old campus. And we put strongly environmental KPIs and climate KPIs at the center. The second and last solution is 3B, a member of our foundation, an app that monitors utilizing IoT, but low impact and emission IoT, fed by solar panels. Maybe, I know that Huawei has got a project in agriculture as well with an Austrian company, and maybe there is another connection there. They monitor the health of the bees. So, wrap it up. Sorry if it was confusing, maybe it's short. I'll let the others speak.
Thank you very much, Ravea. Always very innovative hearing from you. I mean, we talked about energy security, green procurement. Yes, please, you can scan the QR code here and get the white paper at your fingerprint. Now, let me turn to Gary Jacobs, who is the CEO and President of the World Academy of Art and Sciences. I would like to hear from you what's a solution to accelerate the green innovation.
Thank you. Do I have a presentation?
Can I please ask the technical team to get the presentations working? Thank you.
I need a...
Yes, the clicker. Yes, yes, we have it.
Was it clear? Because I was...
All I need is the...
Because women
the
are
clicker.
perfectionists. You know, women always. No,
you're lovely. Yeah, I have the mic. Just to move the. That's all. Thank you. Thank you.
And I sincerely mean that I wanted to.
My thanks to the organizers for choosing such an important topic for addressing the challenges we face today. And the list of skills that we heard from Phoebe was really impressive, and how the composition of jobs is going to change and the composition of our workforce has to change. I think we understand that this is a tremendous challenge for education, tremendous challenge for the existing workforce and for the future. But that's not all we need in terms of skills. Just to put it for you in a little dramatic way, the recent statistics show that about 40% of the world's population is taking their news from social media today. And the same statistics show that the actual reliability rate of the information that's being projected on the social media is somewhere between 12 and 15%. So we have another challenge of skills. How far are we preparing ourselves and the younger generations to distinguish fact from fantasy, or what we call fake news? And how important is that for our success in implementing the 17 SDGs and the Agenda 2030? So I want to focus on another dimension of the skills challenge, or the communication challenge, and that is, how do we reach out to the vast majority of people on Earth who are not only going to be impacted by global warming, but are also going to be decision makers determining whether that global warming can be stopped or not, or whether we can mitigate it. And that is really a challenge. In the World Academy of Art and Science for 2 terms, we had the chairman of IPCC, former chairman of IPC on our board, frequently bringing us up to date with the latest information on what the IPCC was projecting on climate change. And it was very intelligible to the scientists in the room, even the diplomats in the room. We understood the significance of that information. The question is, how far does the world understand it? And how far have we been able to formulate a language of communication that really draws that in? And we had an experience in the World Academy 3 years ago. We were invited by the United Nations Trust Fund on Human Security. The concept of human security has been projected by the Academy since 1995. And they asked us to do a survey of UN officials, diplomats, scientists, academies, parliamentarians, and NGOs on how effectively has the UN communicated the importance of human security and the things that need to be done in order to achieve it. And they were not necessarily surprised, but certainly disappointed to hear that after 25 years of campaigning, somewhere between 10 and 15% of those who were surveyed really had an understanding of this basic concept, which is something relevant to everybody on Earth. What is our human security, and how do we communicate it? And so they asked us to join with them in partnership to launch a campaign called the Human Security for All campaign, to see what the UN has not, and none of this is intended as a criticism of anybody, but it's intended to magnify the challenge we have, and that's what I'm trying to do, of communicating to the broader population that has to change not only lifestyles, but the decisions they're making in virtually every area of their life. And that was the challenge. And the first thing we did was, let me see if I can work this. we approached the consumer electronics industry that runs the Consumer Electronics Show every year in Las Vegas, which is the largest technology show in the world, the largest technology companies, businesses in the world that we all know and use, and many others, and said, what can you do? What do you think you can do as an industrial business organization to help spread the message that's relevant to every person on Earth about their own security? That means food security, health security, employment security, community security, political freedoms, and the individual security. And they said, well, we've never done anything like this in 50 years, but they finally decided to try, and they themed the 2023 Consumer Electronics Show on the theme of human security for all. And they spelled this out to a few thousand of the top leaders of the industry, and then covered 120,000 technology and business leaders in the industry on this, and they ran about 400 or 500 seminars, and everyone started with a 90-second messaging on this, on how important this is to companies in the industry who will be determining the impact of the work they're doing and the technologies they develop and the relevance of their activity for human security of all. And we came away very pleased by the amount of coverage they gave. It was calculated that they gave us about $2.5 million for coverage on an activity in which we spent about $20,000 or $25,000 of our own. But we had no idea what they felt about what the result was. And 2 months later, we had a conversation with them, and they said, we unanimously want to continue this messaging. The first time in 50 years, we thought of projecting a social message in this very important forum, but we now realize this is really essential for our members, and it's essential for the society. And there was almost an emotional commitment that we've got to do what we can do. We're not doing everything we can do to promote this. And from there, we went on and talked to parliamentarians, and now the Interparliamentary Union of 170 parliaments of the world has asked for training in how do we actually adjust our legislation to promote human security in all of these areas. And I'm giving this just as an example of the challenge we have. And with the help of Phoebe and leadership of Phoebe, we approached 140 national academies, science academies of the world, and asked them, don't you think that you also have, the academies have a responsibility for each of these areas? There's something more you can do. And the Inter-Academy Partnership agreed to take their #1 priority for messaging this year would be a message on the role of science and academies in promoting human security. Now, we all know that the climate scientists and many, all of you in the room, and many of the organizations and many leading corporations are committed to addressing climate change. But I think we all know that what's being done so far, even though it's unprecedented in the history of the world, it's not quite enough to capture the unprecedented challenges we face. I spoke to the European Conference, I'll take one more minute, European Conference of Public Health Workers a few weeks ago, where WHO says that climate is the single greatest threat to health in the world. #1 threat to health in the world is climate change. So I asked the public health workers, what are you doing to stop climate change? And the typical response was, well, that's the job of somebody else. Our job is to deal with the health problems that are generated. But the health workers have the highest level of trust and confidence of the public in the world. What we hear from the health workers has the highest level of confidence, and we can believe in it. So I'm giving it as an example. Are there other sections of the global society that we can mobilize to join the tremendous effort that's being taken by the organizations that are here and the governments at COP28? Because the challenge is so great that we've got to reach out with new innovative techniques, new innovative communication strategies. We need to mobilize the arts. We need to mobilize the cinema. We need to mobilize the artists, the writers. We need to mobilize every sector of the society in every discipline, not just in those concerned with economics and ecology and climate change, in every academic discipline to get this message through. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you very much for your contribution. I would like to then, as you spoke about human security, I would like to take it to happiness. We have Yogi Kocher here, who is president of... So we are really tight on time. We need to rush it like one green innovation will be timekeeping.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'll play a short video of about 2 minutes, and then I'll finish whatever it is that I have to say in exactly 2 minutes. And that's about all that I'm here for. Thank you. Can we roll the video, please? Global warming has much less to do with the 1,210 private jets that land in Davos. It has more to do with the aggregate of carbon in our own minds. And it has more to do with the clothes in our wardrobes. Time was when mind was born out of vapor. Time is now when the mind has turned into vapor. And that happens because each one of us use a phone where our screen time is about 6 hours, that slices, dices, and tosses our attention spans, does not leave enough in our minds to be able to assimilate. That's the point I'm trying to make here. So we developed a technology, and I'm extremely grateful to Professor Phoebe for encouraging us there. That's what I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen. And this is just FOMO, fear of missing out, that's just driving us insane into the world of the web, you know, where two spiders mate and it says the female has the male spider for her food after an act of copulation. It's amazing. Our minds have been colonized. My technology that I've developed has now been approved by the government of India, and it is out to impact about 7 million young adults across all the colleges in the form of a compulsory credit course across all the higher educational institutions. So that's the small point that I wanted to make. I personally feel that the 6 hours that we use on the screen actually slices, dices, and tosses the mind, because the neurons are nothing, but they're just connecting and disconnecting. When they connect and disconnect, our proteins get exhausted. When our proteins get exhausted, there's not enough time to even breathe. You know, you lose your phone, you stop breathing. It's like you stop breathing. And that is the problem, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to address. So we created a technology that goes ahead and recovers your mind that you lose on the same phone, using the same phone. And that's the technology that then got us an award at the British Parliament. And then I was very, very grateful to Professor Phoebe to lend us her support and lend us our solidarity in our mission forward. Today, we've reached about 7 million students across in India, and I'm happy to be of service to any of you across any educational institution that would like to introduce the course there. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogi. Thank you very much. Let me now ask on stage Cecil from the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We talked about happiness, mindset, behavioral change. What's your solution? 2 to 3 minutes.
Oh,
pitch.
goodness. I don't know how I can follow on Yogi here.
you heard it also from Phoebe. As SDSN, we're very much focused on development, sustainable development, and problem solving is very much at the heart of what we're doing. And so innovation is an important aspect of that. Maybe if I can just single out to complement what others have said from my own area, and that's kind of policy innovation. So much focus is on technical innovation, but maybe on policy innovation to solve problems. One thing that we keep hearing more and more is a demand for simplification. And I would maybe say, maybe digitalization and the promise of digitalization in many places is that it helps bringing solutions and decisions closer to people and communities, but also to simplify processes. Unfortunately, we hear it quite a lot that even though, for example, there's climate finance available, that in countries they find it very difficult to access financing. And even though scientists are talking about a business as usual approach that needs to end, I feel many of our organizations, many of our mechanisms for financing and development assistance are kind of stuck in a business as usual. And so I think this idea of how can we simplify, how can we accelerate and improve implementation, because innovation is not an end in itself, that's one of the promises of digitalization. And yes, indeed, to hark it all the way back to Phoebe's presentation at the beginning, we need a new generation with skills, with practical competences to help achieve that. So thank you so much for having us on the panel. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Cecil. And now, before we have one final remark, because it's something we really need to finally address, the work of digitalization, let me ask Katem Patel, the CEO of Forest for Good, one very final thought on how to accelerate green innovation. You have also 40 seconds.
40 seconds, oh God. All right, very tight. But firstly, I'm privileged. I'm in the World Academy of Art and Science, and I'm also part of the SDSN network. So I am privileged to participate in both. And I'm a meditator, and I practice breathing yoga every day. So I have a link to everybody in some way who's spoken on the stage. I'd say this, actually. We're in a transition that will be potentially thwarted by war. And so the biggest accelerator would be to find peace. And so there is probably nobody much interested in climate change right now, because 24/7 all we see is a war. And before this war, we saw another war in Europe. And before that, there was the pandemic, which was a war at an individual level, killing so many people. And so, although this is a profound transition, where we let go of the addiction to fossil fuels and the lifestyle that it built, that was probably one of the most successful lifestyles ever built in human history, we are transitioning to something we hope is cleaner and safer and more secure for everybody, as we heard on human security for all, and is superior because of technology and AI. But potentially we will stop it by just waging war on ourselves. And so the most profound accelerator would be to find that peace. And that peace is, of course, global, but of course it's at a very individual level, as we heard earlier too. And so that's our challenge, I believe. The capital is there, the innovation is there. It's not getting unlocked, but that's a much bigger dialogue as to why it's not getting unlocked. And I think it's a dialogue we will have in the same venue sometime tomorrow with Jeffrey Sachs. Phoebe will be hosting too, and I look forward to participating and saying a little bit more. Thank you.
So, as I promised you, we have one final remarks. We need to steal 5 minutes because we lost 5 minutes in the beginning. Accelerate green innovation through digitalization. My absolute mentor, Dr. Xiao Hui, Vice President of European Public Affairs from Huawei. Where you have very little time, huh?
Yes. But before everyone leaves, I still want to emphasize this important paper, which with the joint effort and the leadership of Professor Phoebe, that gives us a very important thinking is, if we want to support the sustainable development of a society, we need to take the multiple action. One of the important element is to make sure our society obtain the skills, understand what kind of green digital skills, the twin skills our society needs from now on for the next decade towards 2050. So this is very crucial and important to make sure we are able to convert our words to actions. And also we see the potential of digital technology, the potential of the ICT play the key role. And we always believe this is, the sustainability is most importantly done through digitization. And also we need to unleash the potential to revolutionize the way we approach the environmental challenges. And also that really requires, everyone, particularly the big corporates like Huawei, to play a more important role than ever. And we are very proud to have the valuable panelists to give the speech. Also, we have the Ambassador Barbara to give a very insightful opening speech. And also with the paper we are working today, and we would call for your participation. We would call for your collaboration. And also eventually, we believe year by year and step by step, we are able to make the change. But another, maybe requirement specifically to Phoebe is potentially we need a dedicated lecture for this. So, and thanks again, for the friends, to join the event today. And I would like to, wish you enjoy the rest of the day, and more importantly, bring, the important messages, understanding back to your business, back to your industry, back to the whole ecosystem. Think about how we should work together, later. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's deliver green digital skills and let's accelerate green innovation. Thank you very much for being